Chapter 1. There was a boat in the ocean. It had been many days since this ship had left White Emperor City. The reason it had not reached its destination was that the people on the ship still hoped to receive good news and return. Until now, there was still no news. The people on the ship finally gave up. As the coastline gradually appeared before them, a hint of relief finally appeared on Mu Jiusher's haggard face. Her uncle was dead, and something must have happened to her sister. She didn't know how to face her brother, but being able to return home was something to be happy about. The second prince looked at her and sighed softly. He knew that from now on, he would not be able to set foot in the Central Plains for hundreds of years. Right at this moment, an ear-piercing sound rang out. The clouds in the sky scattered in fright, and the hull of the ship swayed slightly. A person appeared at the bow of the ship. It was an old man with grizzled hair. His face was round and big, and he looked a little comical. Perhaps it could be said that he looked extremely festive. Mu Jiusher and the second prince had no idea where this person had come from, but they knew that someone who could suddenly appear out of nowhere was assuredly powerful. Moreover, the round-faced old man did not hide his aura, the holy aura that transcended the scope of the mortal world. Mu Jiusher warily stared at him, asking, "Who are you?" The round-faced old man scratched his head, as if he didn't know how to answer this question. After a while, he said, "I think my surname is Chao." Upon hearing this surname, Mu Jiusher and the second prince were both shocked. There were very few experts of the divine domain on the continent, and there was only one surname Chao. That was Chao Yunping. Chao Yunping was the nephew of the Elder of Heavenly Secrets and was once a member of the Storms of the Eight Directions. More than 100 years ago, for some secret reason, he had once fought with Su Li and lost. After that, he suddenly decided to give up on his own cultivation method and cultivate a completely new cultivation method. This was naturally an extremely dangerous thing to do, and in everyone's opinion, it was extremely unwise. But neither the Elder of Heavenly Secrets nor the Tianhai Divine Empress could change his mind. Chao Yunping dispersed all the energy in his body and began cultivating anew. But just as he was about to succeed, the starlight within his body suddenly exploded. Although he had barely survived, his knowledge sea had suffered great damage and his mind had become somewhat muddled. In other words, he had become mentally retarded. From then on, the Storms of the Eight Directions had one less person, and no one had ever seen him again. Mu Jiusher had never imagined that this person would appear on her ship. Moreover, it was clear that his cultivation had been restored, perhaps even stronger than it had been in the past. "Senior, what can I do for you?" When Chao Yunping heard this question, he once again fell into a confused state of mind. He began to recall with all his might. His brows furrowed very tightly, and his round face became even more taut, looking like a pillow stuffed with new cotton. But neither Mu Jiusher nor the second prince dared to laugh. Chao Yunping might have really become a retard, but his realm and strength were still so terrifying. This meant that he was in extreme danger. Chao Pingyun finally remembered. Her eyebrows relaxed. She looked at them and said with a smile, "I remember now." Mu Jiusher cautiously asked, "What has Senior remembered?" Chao Yunping didn't answer her question directly, but complained, "Why did you come back so late? I've been waiting for you for a few days." Mu Jiusher suddenly felt uneasy and asked, "Why is Senior waiting for us?" Chao Yunping said, "I promised Chen Chongxing that I would kill you." Mu Jiusher and the second prince paled at these words. Chao Yunping recalled a few things and hurriedly said to the second prince, "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid. I remember wrong. You weren't involved, but this girl must die." Mu Jiusher glanced at the approaching shoreline and forced herself to calm down. "Why does Senior want to kill me? Is there some misunderstanding here?" In her view, Chen Chongxing had assuredly used some method to invite this hidden expert, or perhaps used words to deceive him. Thus, she could naturally think of a way to persuade him, or perhaps offer him sufficient benefits. The difference between the two depended on whether this hidden expert was truly a fool or just pretending to be one. I'm already a fool, truly. So I've been hiding in the mountains this entire time precisely because I'm afraid that I'll randomly strike outside and kill the wrong good person. Chow Yunping very seriously explained, but you are not a good person, because you colluded with the demons and even killed Bi Yanghong's son. I know Bi Yanghong. He is a good person. Mu Jiushi was very nervous, but her expression remained indifferent. Why is Senior so sure that I am not a good person? Just because Chen Chongqing said this to you? Yes, I believe Chen Chongqing's words because he is also a good person. Qiushan also believes in him because Qiushan is also a good person. Chow Yunping patiently explained to her, "We are all good people, and you are a bad person, so we want to kill you." After the white crane left the shore, it did not fly very far before landing in a mountain range. The 4 prefects of the Orthodoxy and 3,000 Orthodoxy cavalry were waiting in the camp. Ling Haijiwang said to Chen Chongqing, "The Qiushan clan sent a letter. That person has probably gone to the Western Sea." Chen Chongqing froze, then asked, "Are you sure?" Ling Haijiwang replied, "Yes." Su Yorong asked, "Who went to the Western Sea?" Chow Yunping. Chen Chongqing explained, "I met him in the sky a few days ago." Su Yorong knew that when he was coming from the Prince of Luling's estate to reinforce White Emperor City, he had been troubled by a supreme expert. Only now did she know that it was Chow Yunping. She knew who Chow Yunping was and also knew of his relationship with Qiushan Jun, so she could naturally guess at why Chow Yunping had appeared. She gave Chen Chongqing an apologetic glance. Chen Chongqing replied, "It's fine. It was probably the Prince of Xiang who sent a message. It has nothing to do with the Qiushan clan." Su Yorong said, "I heard from Senior Brother that there really is something wrong with this Senior's mind. Will it not affect his judgment? It truly is somewhat damaged. Senior's intelligence is probably at the level of a child, but he's a good person." Chen Chongqing sighed. "I didn't expect that a casual remark from that night would really cause Senior to go to the Western Sea." Ling Haijiwang took out a piece of paper and gave it to Chen Chongqing. This was a yellow piece of paper, 10 some names written in cinnabar. This was a list that Ling Haijiwang and the others had written on the first night they arrived in White Emperor City. Madame Mu's name was at the top of the paper, but a horizontal line had already been drawn across it, representing death. Chen Chongqing took a brush from Daoist Siyuan, dipped it in the melted cinnabar, and then drew a line across Mu Jiushi's name on the second line. This list was a list of people to die. From Hanqiu City to Wenshui to Fengyang City to Holy Maiden Peak to White Emperor City, the names of those who deserved to die were all on it. Next to Mu Jiushi's name was Chusu's. Everyone's gazes fell on this name. The camp became rather quiet. To be continued. Chapter 2. On that list, besides Madame Mu, Chusu had the highest cultivation level. Moreover, this monster that cultivated the Yellow Springs art had powerful escape techniques, secretive movements, unpredictable techniques, and extremely sinister and cunning. Although he had been heavily injured by Su Yorong's severed arm in White Emperor City, he was still extremely difficult to kill. Presumably, this monster had already hidden himself in the lush mountains, so how could they find him? Perhaps I can guess where he will go. The blind zither player from the Tang clan suddenly spoke. "If your holiness does not mind, leave this matter to me." Only now did everyone recall that this blind zither player was the previous Grand Elder of the Longevity sect, and that monster called Chusu was a remnant soul of the previous Longevity sect master. Ling Haijiwang looked at Chen Chongqing, clearly somewhat tempted. Chen Chongqing did not agree, as the blind zither player had suffered severe injuries in his battle with the Angel of Sacred Light. It would be very difficult for him to recover in a short period of time, and the zither player was still a guardian of the Tang clan. Su Yorong understood his meaning and said, "Let me go." In terms of pursuing and killing Chusu, She was unquestionably the most suitable, perhaps even the only choice. Her Taoist technique and Chusu's yellow springs art mutually countered each other, and she could use her speed to forcefully break Chusu's escape technique. Other than her, no one else present could catch up to Chusu, and even if they did, they might not be able to kill him. Not even Chen Chongqing was confident. Chen Chongqing still did not agree, and his reason received the approval of everyone present. He would soon return to the capital. In that city there were even more important matters, truly troublesome problems, waiting for him. At a time like this, Su Yorong could not leave his side. Linghai Jiwang asked, "Then what do we do? Put this matter aside for the time being?" The camp once more fell silent, the mood rather oppressive. "I'll think of a way." Chen Chongqing glanced at Su Yorong and walked out of the camp. Su Yorong understood and followed. Linghai Jiwang and the others were somewhat worried as they turned to Tang 36. Tang 36 waved his hand, expressing his attitude that he would not participate in this matter. "I'll go take a look." As the most junior archbishop, Hu 32 helplessly sighed and also walked out of the camp. When they reached a pine tree on the cliff, Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong stopped. He knew that Hu 32 was following behind him, but he did not stop him. If he did not let these archbishops know about his method, they would not be able to rest easy. A gust of wind rustled the branches, and the pine needles rustled down. Some of the yellowish pine needles fell on the yellow-mottled fur, as if they had melded into one, making it hard to tell them apart. It was a creature that looked like a mutt. Its fur was very messy and disgusting. Both of its hind legs seemed to be broken, dragging on the ground powerlessly. It looked rather pitiful. Looking at Chen Chongqing, its eyes flashed with excitement. Using its forelimbs to support its body, it crawled in front of Chen Chongqing with great difficulty and kept kissing his feet. Su Yorong tilted her head as she watched this scene. She found it rather interesting. Although this was not the first time she had seen something like this, every time she saw the demonic beast acting as a treacherous official, she still wanted to laugh. Hu 36 did not find this amusing. When he saw the other party's two small evil eyes, he felt a chill run through his body. Suddenly, he recalled the origins of these monsters. His expression abruptly changed as he said in a trembling voice, "This is an earth monkey?" Yes, this was the earth monkey that had lived in the Garden of Zhou for several centuries. It was also one of the most sinister, shameless, crafty, and bloodthirsty monsters recorded in the Taoist canon. Even massive monsters like the mountain-toppling fiend and the monster bull, which were ranked extremely high on the ranking of 100 beasts, were not willing to offend the earth monkey. They even had to listen to its orders on the battlefield. Upon confirming that this yellow dog-like creature was that terrifying monster of legends and recalling those bloody stories, Hu 32 felt an even colder chill. If this earth monkey had not been summoned by Chen Chongqing and had appeared so humble and obedient, he would have immediately killed it, even if he had to put his life on the line. The earth monkey sensed Hu 32's hostility and a very faint hint of fear. It had been so many years since it had left the real world, but humans still remembered its vicious reputation. This made it rather proud, and then it quickly came to its senses. Unlike those monsters that were willing to peacefully live out their days in the Garden of Zhou, the earth monkey had always wanted to return to the world it had once lived in to take a look. For this reason, it had begged Chen Chongqing many times, but when Chen Chongqing thought of its vicious reputation and its evil deeds in the rumors, he naturally would not agree. But since Chen Chongqing had summoned it from the Garden of Zhou to the real world, this naturally meant that the situation had changed. Perhaps it really did have a chance of getting what it wanted. At this crucial moment, the earth monkey naturally would not make a mistake. Its eyes became even more innocent, its expression even more humble, and its body even lower. Its two crippled hind legs trembled, and its tail rapidly slapped the ground, but it was also extremely careful not to stir up a speck of dust. It was truly as pitiful as it could be. Hu 32 remained vigilant and would not be fooled by this sort of facade. Su Yorong, on the other hand, couldn't help but laugh. Chen Chongqing said, "Stop pretending and get up." Upon hearing this, the earth monkey hurriedly straightened its body, not daring to make any unnecessary movements. Its 2 crippled hind legs had been healed long ago. But in the last few years in the Garden of Zhou, it was still used to dragging its 2 hind legs as it crawled across the grassland. Other than the mountain-toppling fiend and the monster bull, no other monsters knew about it. Chen Chongqing said, "Help me do one thing." The earth monkey's eyes rolled around, seemingly thinking of something. Chen Chongqing took a pill from his bosom and fed it to the earth monkey. The earth monkey's eyes instantly lit up and it sat down on the ground, closing its eyes like a cultivator and beginning to meditate. A faint mist began to seep out of its nose and mouth. The remaining internal injuries had also been completely healed. This pill was not the cinnabar pill. It had been refined from the waste materials of the cinnabar pill, but it also contained some of Chen Chongqing's blood. After some time, the earth monkey opened its eyes and looked gratefully at Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing took the portrait of Chusu from Hu 32's hands and unfurled it in front of the earth monkey. This person. The earth monkey looked at the grotesque fellow in the portrait and thought to itself, "To think that there would be someone in the world uglier than me." It couldn't help but feel curious. Chen Chongqing added, "Kill him." The earth monkey was instantly startled out of its stupor and whimpered, using its bloodthirsty killing intent to prove its loyalty. Only then did Hu 32 understand what Chen Chongqing intended to do. Logically speaking, the earth monkey was born with the ability to travel through the earth and was extremely savage and sinister. Using it to pursue and kill Chusu was the best choice. But Chusu was also a true monster. The earth monkey might not be able to kill him. "I have an idea." Hu 32 was well aware that once he made this suggestion, the Pope's evaluation of him would change, and the Pope might even begin to guard against him. But as the Pope's most loyal subordinate, he had to make his suggestion known, and he could not hide anything. After hearing this idea, Chen Chongqing truly did look at him differently. Even the earth monkey looked at Hu 32 differently, as if it wanted to make him a comrade. Su Yorong only shook her head. The earth monkey left the cliff and headed into the mountains to search for the world it had lost and Chusu. Other than Chen Chongqing, Hu 32, and Hu 32, no one else knew of this matter, much less how the earth monkey would appear before Chusu. Not long after the earth monkey left, the Orthodoxy's army set out once more, heading toward the capital. Everyone knew that Chen Chongqing had returned to the capital because he had received a letter. But was it really just because of that letter? Of course not, because the young emperor was still in the capital, as was Shang Xingzhou. Most importantly, the Li Palace was also in the capital. To be continued. Chapter 3. Linghai Jiwang, Archbishop Enlin, and the others knew that starting from 3 years ago, someone from the capital had been communicating with the Pope. Whether the Pope was in the snowy mountains, in Hanqiu City, or in Wenshui, those letters had never stopped. In the letter, that person helped to plan many things, especially in the last few months. Many people were guessing who the mysterious person who wrote the letter was. Linghai Jiwang had once wondered if that person was Tianhai Xingxue, while Archbishop Enlin believed that Prince Chen Lu was the most likely. It wasn't until the news of the marriage spread across the entire continent and Chen Chongqing was preparing to return to the capital to officiate the wedding did people realize that the person who wrote the letter was Mou. As the most powerful woman of the Tianhai dynasty, perhaps even the most powerful person, many people did not understand why Mou was still alive after the Tianhai Divine Empress's death, and why she was openly living in the capital, even marrying that person. Many people thought that it was because of her relationship with Chen Chongqing that the imperial court was afraid of her. The scene of Mou and Zhixiu cutting Zhou Tong to 1,000 cuts on the road of peace that year was still unforgettable to this day. But was Chen Chongqing's decision to return to the capital really just because she wrote a letter asking him to preside over the wedding? Ling Haijiwang and the others did not think so. Looking at Chen Chongqing's back, they could all feel the heavy pressure. The formless yet infinitely heavy sky seemed to have landed on his shoulders. It was still that year, on that windy and snowy night, when Shang Xingzhou and Chen Chongqing had a conversation in the Orthodox Academy. Other than the little black dragon, no one knew the specifics of this conversation, but the events that followed allowed many people to guess at what had happened. Shang Xingzhou and Chen Chongqing must have reached some sort of agreement. Chen Chongqing left the capital, becoming the first exiled pope in history. Many stories followed, from the snowy mountains to Wenshui, to Holy Maiden Peak, and then to White Emperor City. It was only in the face of the threat of the demons and the sacred light continent, as well as the White Emperor's deep and astute schemes, that this master and disciple finally joined hands, proving that the saying of Xining being ruled by one temple, that the situation between the two sides seemed to have eased. But at this time, Chen Chongqing decided to return to the capital, which meant that the agreement would be nullified. Would this be a journey to break the ice, or the beginning of a civil war among the human race? Winter was coming to an end, but spring had yet to arrive. The world was still cold. Whether it was inside or outside the city, the Luo River was still. A thick layer of snow covered the surface of the ice, making it look like an extremely wide belt. 3,000 cavalry escorted the orthodoxy's convoy from the horizon, entering the sights of the populace. Ling Haijiwang and the other prefects of the orthodoxy sat in the divine carriage at the very front. The gloom willow and the other treasures of the Li Palace exuded a warm and divine light under the gloomy sky. Tens of thousands of people stood on both sides of the official road into the city, welcoming the return of the orthodoxy's diplomatic mission. The populace had no idea what had happened in White Emperor City, but they knew that the demon race's plot had been broken. The most worrisome demi-human betrayal of the alliance had not occurred, and all of this was the work of the Li Palace. Fruits and flowers, rare and precious in the depths of winter, were thrown into the bosoms of the orthodoxy cavalry. More gazes landed on the two extremely tall divine carriages at the back. Those gazes were filled with fervor, reverence, worship, and even fanaticism. I heard that the Pope has returned. The Saintess had also returned. As the convoy slowly advanced, the people on both sides of the road began to surge forward, causing the scene to become even more crowded. If not for the soldiers of the city gate department strictly blocking the way, trouble really might have arisen. And Hua, dressed in the ceremonial robes of the 13 divisions of radiant green, led several thousand of the most loyal believers of the orthodoxy in kneeling before the two divine carriages. Soon after, even more people knelt like a tide, a dense mass of people in a spectacular sight. The capital had no city walls. Other than those flying carriages, the only places one could see further were those very tall buildings in the city. In the last 3 years, Tian Haichenwu had lived in an estate outside the city, rarely entering the city, and even more rarely entering the palace to meet privately with His Majesty. As the head of the Tianhai clan, in the current complex situation, no amount of caution was excessive. But today was an exception. He had reserved the Pine Lodge, which was equally famous as Clear Lake Restaurant, and had invited several extremely eye-catching nobles to accompany him. Among these nobles were several divine generals, and more importantly, there was also the Prince of Zhongshan. As they gazed at the tens of thousands of people kneeling in the distance, those divine generals had rather gloomy expressions. As the proud students of Chen Guansong, the former principal of Star Caesar Academy, they were highly valued by Shang Xingzhou, so this sight naturally made them feel very embarrassed. But they said nothing, nor could they say anything. Those people were worshipping the Pope and the Holy Maiden. This was a matter that was perfectly justified. Moreover, during the ceremony to close South Stream Temple, the Pope had personally killed the White Tiger Divine General in front of the Prince of Xiang. Even so, what had the imperial court done? Tian Haichenwu looked at the woman at the very front of the crowd, dressed in the ceremonial robes of the 13 divisions of radiant green. He slightly creased his brow and asked, "Who is this person?" Other than her relationship with Archbishop Anlin, Anhua was just an ordinary priest. But now, she had become extremely famous in the capital, especially in the northern part of the continent. Very quickly, a subordinate reported her background. "A bunch of fools," Tian Haichenwu harshly said. "They truly don't know what to do. Is this a demonstration to the imperial court?" "Demonstration? This is the will of the people, and this was all done by that foolish woman you speak of." The prince of Zhongshan's complexion was still as foul as ever, like everyone in the world owed him money. Perhaps it was because he still could not forget the excrement he had been forced to eat back then, but his tone was much gentler now. Tian Haichenwu understood what he meant. Chen Chongqing had secluded himself from the world for 3 years, but in such a short amount of time, he had managed to obtain so much loyalty and fame. This was naturally related to the Li Palace, especially the preaching of those fanatics led by Anhua. His gaze left Anhua and fell on the 2 holy carriages behind her, and he couldn't help but focus. With his level of cultivation, he could naturally see that there was no one on those 2 holy carriages. 3 years later, Chen Chongqing returned to the capital. He did not return to the Li Palace, did not return to the Orthodox Academy, did not go to the Imperial Palace to see his senior brother. Instead, he went straight to a mansion. Many years ago, when he first came to the capital, he had also gone straight to this place. He had not gone to see the stone pillars and ivy outside the Li Palace, nor had he gone to the mausoleum of books. At the time, it was precisely because of this that he had been scorned by the mistress of this mansion. This mansion was naturally the divine general of the East's estate. The Su estate was still the same as it was in the past, brimming with a somber aura. It truly was not a lie to say that managing a household was like managing an army. All the maids and maids had been driven far away, leaving only a few people in the reception hall. Chen Chongqing sat in a chair while Su Shurji's wife, Granny Hua, and Schwanger stood in the hall. The atmosphere was very awkward, and even the tension concealed within could not flow, as if it had been frozen. To be continued. Chapter 4. The teacup was quietly placed on the table, long since cold. Chen Chongqing quietly sat in his chair, showing no intention of speaking. Just like back then, nothing seemed to have changed. But in reality, everything had changed long ago. That young Taoist whose marriage had been ruined when he first entered the capital had already become the Pope. Fortunately, just like back then, Su Shurji was not present, or else the situation might have been even more awkward. The bead curtain clattered against each other as Su Yorong walked out from behind it. Upon returning to the divine general's estate, Su Yorong ignored him, leaving him in the hall while she went to wash herself. This seemed very casual, just like the black hair casually draped over her back. Her slightly damp hair was dotted with a few beads of water. Paired with her clean, untainted, flower-like appearance, she looked very moving. Chen Chongqing very much liked his fiancée's beauty, and he liked even more how casual she was with him. He wanted to keep looking at her like this, but this was still the Su estate, and he still had many things to do. He stood up and said to Su Yorong, "Then I'll leave first." Su Yorong was rather surprised. "You're not going to eat?" This was her home and Chen Chongqing was her fiancé. She was very casual with both parties, so this question was asked very naturally. It wasn't until she noticed the strange atmosphere in the reception hall that she understood the reason. She couldn't help but laugh and say, "Then you can leave. I'll come pick you up tomorrow," Chen Chongqing said to her. He then turned and bid farewell to Madame Su, not forgetting to nod in greeting to the granny and Schwanger. Whether it was in etiquette or bearing, there was nothing that could be criticized about him. This sort of calmness still made Madame Su and the others recall that scene from several years ago. These past few years seemed to have not changed him at all. Whether it was the young Taoist or the current Pope, he had always treated this world and the people that lived in it with such calm and indifference. Walking out of the divine general's estate, he walked along that unremarkable stream and quickly arrived at the simple and crude stone arch bridge. Chen Chongqing walked onto the bridge, but unlike several years ago, he did not turn his head to look at that beautiful courtyard. After 3 years, he returned to the capital. He did not go to the Li Palace, nor did he go to the Orthodox Academy. Instead, he immediately went to the Su estate. It was not because he wanted to do anything, but because his fiancée wanted him to accompany her home. The reason was that simple. In the past few years, he had come to the Su manor as a guest twice. If one were to say that he felt proud and elated, he didn't. It felt like a lifetime had passed, and he didn't either. He and Su Yorong were still very young and had a long life ahead of them. They still had many things to do and many places to go. Compared to the future, the past was not important at all. Then let it pass. Perhaps this was the meaning of the past's existence. Suddenly, snowflakes began to fall. Chen Chongqing opened the yellow paper umbrella and disappeared into the crowd. Let bygones be bygones. This was a very simple sentence and a very simple principle, but not everyone could do it. For example, Su Shiji. After returning to the manor, he heard about what had happened during the day. His expression became abnormally ugly, but in the end, he did not do anything. Not even a porcelain wine cup was smashed. Su Yorong was resting in the backyard. The entire divine general's estate was as quiet as an old mountain range. In the past few years, Su Shiji had already acknowledged reality. His status in the great Zhou dynasty was completely due to his daughter. Whether it was when the Tianhai Divine Empress was on the throne or now, this had never changed. This was a very difficult matter to accept, but he could only accept it. He simply didn't know how to face his daughter. Madame Su also found it impossible to forget those matters of the past. In a downcast tone, she said, "Back then, how could I have imagined that he would become the Pope?" Su Shiji harshly replied, "So what? In the end, he's still not my son-in-law." Seeing the son-in-law's carefree and unperturbed appearance when he left, you have no idea how proud he was inside. In the backyard, Schwanger stood in front of Su Yorong, a bowl of blue lobster meat in her hands, her voice tinged with anger. Su Yorong softly replied, "Back then, you mentioned in your letter that he was just like this. What did he have to be proud of back then?" Schwanger pondered this, then said, "The him back then was too hypocritical or perhaps unreasonable?" Su Yorong raised her head and indifferently glanced at her. Schwanger tensed up and hurriedly said, "Young lady, I was wrong." Su Yorong asked, "Do you know that you're a ******? She thought about how her evaluation of Chen Chongqing was extremely unbearable and thought about the deep affection between her young lady and him. She grew more and more nervous, her voice trembling as she said, "I couldn't see the son-in-law's good side, and I even discussed him so much. Your eyes truly can't be called good, but back then, how many people could see his good side?" Su Yorong suddenly recalled that when she returned to the capital, she had visited the Orthodox Academy at night and encountered Mou in his room. She then thought about how Mou was about to get married but had asked him to come back and officiate the wedding. She couldn't help but slightly arch her brows, thinking, this is a person with good eyes. Just what's so good about him? Su Yorong said softly, "I like that no matter what he encounters, even if it is the great terror between life and death, he will never be depressed. Moreover, he does not abandon himself after giving up. He is still focused and persistent, firm and calm." Schwanger didn't understand, but she could hear the true love in her young lady's words and couldn't help but be stunned. The marriage between Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong was already set in stone, but until now, she still didn't think that her young lady truly liked Chen Chongqing. Because in her eyes, her young lady was as noble and proud as a phoenix. How could she like someone? At this moment, a servant came to report that Su Shiji had arrived. The door of the courtyard opened and a footprint appeared on the snowy ground. The two of them sat across from each other. There were 2 expensive teacups on the table. Everything was very polite. They didn't look like father and daughter, but more like guests. Su Shiji looked at his daughter and wanted to say something, but he didn't know what to say. He wanted to say something but stopped. In the end, he could only casually take care of her daily life and then leave. But before he left, he didn't hide his worry. Su Yorong knew what her father wanted to say, or in other words, what he wanted her to say to Chen Chongsheng. Just like when she was little, her father would act like this when he wanted to enter the palace to see the divine queen. She didn't want to hear it because she didn't want to say anything to Chen Chongsheng. This was also very similar to when she was little. She never wanted to talk about these things with the divine queen. Ever since her heavenly phoenix bloodline awakened and she began to cultivate, she felt that these things were very boring, very vexing. Tonight, she felt very vexed, so she faced the night snow and climbed to the roof. With her hands behind her back, she began to gaze at the stars. The night sky was covered with thick dark clouds, so she naturally couldn't see the many stars, but it couldn't block out her spiritual sense. She gazed at the sea of stars at night, reflecting on the rubbing of the heavenly tome monoliths. Quietly comprehending, her Tao heart gradually calmed. The wind and snow were slightly disturbed. The black-clothed girl landed at Su Yorong's side. The light was somewhat dim, but the cinnabar mole between her eyebrows was still bright and dazzling. Su Yorong stared at it a few times. The black-clothed girl was slightly annoyed. "Are you that curious?" Su Yorong seriously replied, "Of course. When I was little, I went for a walk at New North Bridge. I was really prepared to jump into the well to find you." The black-clothed girl sneered. "Then how come I've never seen you? And you're still alive?" Su Yorong gazed at the falling snow and smiled. "The Empress saved me." The 7th chapter of the 4th volume, East Dawn, is called She. Today's chapter is a continuation of that chapter. My Su Yorong is a very good Su Yorong. It's just that I'm limited by the length. My praise for her is very easily missed by the readers, so I will do my best to mention it. In addition, I really like the song, she said. Lin Junjie is still very awesome. I don't pay much attention to new singers. I like Zhang Baikan, Wu Macho, Watching You, and who else? Lastly, at nightfall, I once wrote a chapter called Sang Sang Said. That chapter was extremely well written, the peak of my life. To be continued. Chapter 5. The words that were blocked in the previous chapter were, "Do you know where you went wrong?" As for why, who the hell knows, before going to South Stream Temple to study, Su Yorong had already left behind many famous deeds in the capital. At the time, she was still very young. She had once jumped into the Luo River, saying that there was a moon there. She would often climb those stone pillars in front of the Li Palace, saying that she wanted to see the stars. There was also one time when she almost jumped into that abandoned well at New North Bridge when no one was paying attention. It was said that when she was prepared to jump into that abandoned well at New North Bridge, it was the Divine Empress who saved her. At the time, Su Yorong was not even 5 years old. The citizens of the capital could recite these things backward. From their point of view, they watched Su Yorong grow up. She was the most favored daughter of the capital. That was why the city was so angry at Chen Chongsheng, and the Tradition Academy was under so much pressure when they found out about the marriage contract at the Ivy Festival. The little black dragon thought of the Tianhai Divine Empress and subconsciously felt timid. After a while, she came to her senses and said, "In other words, your life truly was changed by her." Su Yorong faintly smiled. Perhaps. With or without the Tianhai Divine Empress, Su Yorong, who possessed the bloodline of the heavenly phoenix, would still have been able to reach her current level of success. But no one could deny that this woman who had once dominated the continent had truly changed the lives of many people. Mou was the most typical example of this. If not for the Tianhai Divine Empress, how could this orphan girl, whose entire clan had been executed, have become the Grand Lady Mo, whose power could overturn all levels of society? As he gazed at the tensome orange lanterns hanging in front of the gate, exuding a warm light, Chen Chongqing thought of the changes that had taken place in the last few years, and couldn't help but feel somewhat emotional. It had been many years since he had come to the capital from Xining village, and he had known Mou for a long time, but tonight was his first time visiting the legendary Orange Garden. He could sense the powerful qi of the array in the Orange Garden, and he could also sense the watchers and guards hidden in the darkness. It was very obvious that even though she was about to marry that prince, there were still many people who were unwilling to let Mou return to the capital, maintaining a fierce vigilance and hostility towards her. Chen Chongqing had no intention of hiding his track. Raising the yellow paper umbrella, he walked to the gate. The gate of the Orange Garden opened and then closed. With two creaks, several flakes of snow fell. As the garden gate closed, there was a sudden commotion in the night. A dozen or so figures broke through the wind and snow, rushing toward various parts of Jingdo. After the Pope left the Divine General of the East's mansion, he went to the Orange Garden. In a short amount of time, this news spread throughout Jingdo. Naturally, it also spread to the manors on the two sides of the Road of Peace. In the worst location and most unremarkable prince's estate, the Prince of Luoyang was constantly pacing around like an ant on a hot pan. The window of his study was wide open, allowing snowflakes to fly in from time to time, but they still could not lessen the sweat on his chubby, round face. He suddenly stopped, looked at a woman, and said with a bitter face, "What should we do? What should we do?" The woman was very confused and said, "Your Highness, this means that His Holiness the Pope values the princess. This is an extremely good thing." The Prince of Luoyang gave her a resentful glance and said, "You also know that it's a princess, my heavens." The woman finally understood what he meant and asked in shock, "Could it be that your Highness is jealous?" The Prince of Luoyang snorted for a long time, but in the end, he did not dare to speak clearly, but his meaning was very clear. If this woman were not his aunt and had come all the way from Rougeau to manage his marriage, he would not have dared to reveal even the slightest of these intentions. Everyone said that the princes of the Qin clan had regained their power, but he was the least promising of them all, and his opponent was the Pope. The woman snapped, "Everyone knows of the relationship between His Holiness and the Holy Maiden. Just what nonsense is your Highness thinking? If not for the princess's face, how could His Holiness have agreed to preside over the wedding? If not for this relationship, would His Holiness have placed you in such an important place as Taichung Temple?" Upon hearing these words, the Prince of Luoyang immediately forgot his jealousy, but the sweat that he had just stopped began to pour out once more. With a sobbing tone, he said, "The people of the Tianhai clan and several princes are all eyeing that position. I didn't think that His Holiness would have me go. I've offended so many people. What should I do?" Chen Chongqing glanced out the window and saw that it was still snowing. He cared a great deal about cleanliness, but he still did not understand why women were willing to bathe in such cold weather. Mou was truly worthy of being the most famous beauty of the Tianhai dynasty. Even though she had just come out of the bath, her face was still as picturesque and beautiful as ever. The most famous event in the capital in the last 2 years was probably Mou's return. Those princes of the Qin clan who hated the Tianhai Divine Empress to the bone had not made things difficult for her for several reasons. The Mo clan had suffered an extremely tragic fate in the previous dynasty, a fact that garnered the sympathy of many civil officials of the old dynasty. More importantly, she had been personally summoned back to the palace by His Holiness, and for the sake of her deceased grandfather, that famous grand scholar, Shang Xingzhou had expressed his tacit approval of this. There was another important reason. She was about to marry a prince surnamed Chen, and it was that most hopeless, most useless, and least threatening prince. I still don't understand why you want to marry him. Chen Chongqing's question was also the question of all the people of the capital. No matter what they thought of Mo, whether they loved or hated her, she was still Grand Lady Mo. Everyone felt that the prince was not worthy of her. What's not good about him? He's honest and dutiful, he has no ambition. I've known him since I was a child, and most importantly, he is willing to trust me unconditionally. Mo sat on the edge of the bed, using a soft cotton towel to wipe her damp hair. She casually replied, when the capital was in such chaos, he brought those subordinates that his brothers had shoved over to the Orange Garden. He said to others that he wanted to seek my protection, but in reality, he wanted to protect me. I have to return this favor. Chen Chongqing knew of this matter, as did all the people of the capital. On the night of the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, 10 princes entered the capital, taking enormous risks to separately attack the various ministries and important places. Only the Prince of Luoyang led a group of experts to flee the capital, not daring to do anything, not daring to kill a single person. He only wanted to find the Orange Garden, but in the end, he still got lost. This was not a beautiful story, but a laughingstock, even a joke. In the view of many people, the Prince of Luoyang was a joke. Chen Chongqing also felt that this prince was too mediocre and useless, truly not a good match. What is a good match? It's fine as long as he treats me well. Mo suddenly thought of something and said, in the future, treat him a little better. Don't be so rude. Chen Chongqing replied, I'm just giving you a few words of advice as a friend. Since you don't agree, I naturally won't say them again. Mo glared at him and said, I'm talking about the matter of the Prince of Luling's estate. Look at how scared he's become. You clearly know that he's a coward. Not even Chen Chongqing understood why he had been so rude to the Prince of Luoyang that day in the Prince of Luling's estate. He was acting as a messenger for you, master and disciple, but in the end, nothing good happened. He's truly unlucky. Mo said, you were wrong in this matter. Chen Chongqing said, I won't be like this in the future. Mo was rather unhappy that he had agreed. She said, come here. Chen Chongqing froze, asking, do what? Mo said, I want to sleep with you in my arms. Chapter 6. What? I want to hug you to sleep. Ah! Yes. Mo said it confidently. Chen Chongqing heard it like thunder. He waved his hand and said, don't mess around. Mo said, then why did you come here? Chen Chongqing said, I came to see you, to persuade you, and to thank you. Mo did a lot of things and it was worth him coming here to thank her. Mo said, if you want to thank me, you have to sleep with me. Chen Chongqing said helplessly, you are going to get married in a few days. I didn't ask you to sleep with me back then. Mo looked at him and said, it is because I am going to get married that I want to sleep with you. She still said this sentence confidently and openly. There were many meanings hidden in it and the meaning was very obvious. Chen Chongqing didn't know how to respond. Mo stared at his eyes and said, you don't dare to come here because you have feelings for me. Chen Chongqing hesitated and walked to the bed and sat down. Mo wrapped her arms around his waist and put her face on his back. Chen Chongqing suddenly thought of something. Didn't you take a set of my bedding and pillows from the Tradition Academy? Mo leaned on his back and didn't need to worry about being seen. She relaxed a lot. After hearing this, the blush on her face quickly dissipated. She thought that it was really absurd at that time, but she had completely forgotten that it was actually very absurd at this time. After a long time, the smell on the bedding and pillows has faded. Then do you still have insomnia recently? It's strange. After the Queen left, I never had insomnia again. That day in Zhou Tong's house, I even took a nap. Really? Yes. I will just sit here. You can sleep for a while. Just for a while. Just for a while. The room became quiet. Chen Chongqing sat on the bed and didn't dare to move. Mou hugged his waist and didn't move. Logically speaking, this position was very uncomfortable, but she quickly fell asleep. She slept very soundly and even snored softly. Time passed slowly, just like the snow outside the window, gradually accumulating. Just as Chen Chongqing thought he might have to sit like this for the entire night and was thinking about how to explain to Su Yurong tomorrow, Mou woke up. After an hour of sleep, she became energetic. One could imagine how good the quality of her sleep was. A servant girl brought over a bowl of crystal bird's nest. She ate 2 mouthfuls and suddenly raised her head. She looked at Chen Chongqing and said, "Why haven't you left yet?" Chen Chongqing felt a bit helpless and said, "I thought you wrote me to come here to discuss something. So you don't want anything, you just want to hug me to sleep." Mou said, "There's nothing to talk about. The situation in Jingdo is very calm. There hasn't been much change from a while ago." In the past 3 years, they had kept in touch with each other. From Mou, he was no stranger to the current political situation. In the current imperial court, the 10 princes of the Qin clan, led by the Prince of Xiang and the Prince of Zhongshan, together with the Tianhai clan and the several divine generals raised by Qin Guansong, formed one faction. The surviving civil officials of the previous court and eunuch Lin in the palace formed the other faction. To make a simple distinction between these 2 factions, one had to consider their attitudes toward the emperor. If your master was willing to manage these matters, these problems naturally wouldn't have arisen, but it's clear that he doesn't want to. Mou said, "Perhaps he wants to see His Majesty's ability to manage government affairs, or perhaps he just wants to train His Majesty. Senior can handle these problems." Chen Chongqing recalled that long ago in Xining village, he had personally caught all the scaleless fish in the stream outside the temple and then had his senior cook them. His senior was the best at cooking fish because his mind was very calm, he was very patient, and his technique was very steady. So the greatest problem of the imperial court is outside the imperial court. To put it more accurately, it is the relationship with the orthodoxy. Mou said, "Many people want to know how the venerable Taoist will deal with your return to the capital." Chen Chongqing replied, "I am waiting to meet with him." After leaving the capital on a snowy night, master and disciple had never met again. Now that he had returned to the capital, they would inevitably meet. Chen Chongqing was confident that in this meeting, Shang Xingzhou would have to look him straight in the eye and not treat him as a stranger. Mou asked, "Is it possible to dissolve all grudges with a smile?" Chen Chongqing said nothing. He knew what the greatest problem between him and his master was. It was the world's most difficult knot to untie. In the end, besides using a sword to sever it, there seemed to be no good method. Mou did not care about his attitude. "Although no one, including me, understands why the 2 of you, master and disciple, have become enemies, I think that you should prepare yourself for the venerable Taoist to change his attitude. When he expresses his intention to reconcile, you should react a little faster." Chen Chongqing asked, "You really think that his attitude will change?" "Who knows? In the matter of White Emperor City, he and the imperial court both owe you a favor, and perhaps he will suddenly get over it." Mou said, "For the great task of exterminating the demons, it wouldn't be strange for him to be willing to do anything." Chen Chongqing knew that this was not very likely, but just as Mou said, anything was possible. When he thought about the possibility that this might really happen, he suddenly felt a little hope. If it can be like this, then it would be for the best. But if it's just like this, it's far from being able to resolve the problem between the 2 of you. "I don't understand what you mean." "You think that if the venerable Taoist changes his attitude, this story will end in a comedy." Mou looked at him and said, "On the contrary, if it really is like this, then it means that a tragedy is about to begin." Chen Chongqing asked, "Just what are you trying to say?" Mou asked back, "Will you avenge the Divine Empress?" Chen Chongqing shook his head. Not to mention that this might cause the human race to fall into civil war, even revenge itself was meaningless. The Divine Empress had saved his life, but he still did not have the right to carry that great banner. His senior, who had the most right to avenge the Divine Empress, was now the emperor of the great Zhou dynasty, and was his master's most beloved and most trusted disciple. Even his senior could not do anything because of those events in the past, let alone him. Including those princes, many people are watching me, wary of me, because they are all afraid that I will avenge the Divine Empress. Mo looked into his eyes and said, "But all of you have forgotten, the person who most wants to avenge the Divine Empress is not you or His Majesty, nor is it me." Chen Chongqing suddenly felt somewhat uneasy. He truly had forgotten. The entire court had forgotten. The entire continent had forgotten. The person who most wanted to avenge the Divine Empress, and was also the person most qualified to avenge the Divine Empress. It was Su Yurong. The Divine Empress had watched her grow up. Compared to the previous holy maiden, the Divine Empress was her first teacher. Compared to Su Shiji and his wife, the Divine Empress was her true mother. The Divine Empress was a phoenix, and Su Yurong was also a phoenix. Compared to the Princess of Ping, she was the Divine Empress's true daughter. Compared to Yurin, she was the Divine Empress's true successor. Mou asked, "Do you think that she will not avenge the Divine Empress?" Chen Chongqing was silent for a very long time, then said, "She has never mentioned these things. With her relationship with the Empress, do you not feel that it is very strange that she has not mentioned it even once in these 3 years?" Mou looked into his eyes and said, "I watched her grow up, so I know how terrifying her willpower and ability to act are. Not mentioning it for 3 years, not even thinking about it, what sort of willpower did this require? If she had a similarly powerful ability to act, just how far would she have walked? The cold snow drifted down, the winter wind was like a knife. Chen Chongqing took Su Yurong and went to the 100-herb garden. They held up the yellow paper umbrella and walked to the deepest part of the garden. There was a very ordinary forest there. There used to be stone tables and stone chairs in the forest, but now there was only an empty space. Su Yurong looked at that place and said nothing. The Divine Empress was buried there. In a very, very deep place. To be continued. Chapter 7. Chen Chongqing looked at Su Yurong. Looking from the side, she was very beautiful. Just like looking from any angle. She was as calm as usual. But for some reason, Chen Chongqing felt like he saw a hint of autumn coldness on her face. Or was it because of what Mou said to him yesterday? From last night until now, he had thought for a long time and hesitated for a long time. Finally, he asked, "Do you want to say something?" Su Yurong was a little surprised and said, "Say what?" Whether it was her expression or her action of turning around to look at him, it was all so natural. Chen Chongqing suddenly didn't know how to continue this topic. His gaze fell on the grass not far away. A smile appeared on Su Yurong's face. "Are you talking about the Empress?" Chen Chongqing nodded. Su Yurong's smile gradually disappeared. She said softly, "She's like my mother." Chen Chongqing looked at that place and asked, "Are you preparing to do something?" Su Yurong looked at him and said calmly, "Did Mou say something to you last night?" Chen Chongqing said very honestly, "She felt that you would avenge the Divine Empress." Su Yurong said, "If I wanted to do it, would you be worried?" Chen Chongqing's answer was still very honest, "Yes." Su Yurong said indifferently, "Isn't this what she should do the most? You should also be worried about her." Chen Chongqing said, "Last night, she told me that killing Zhou Tong that year was paying back the Empress's affection for all these years." Su Yurong was silent for a while and said, "It's natural to return what you borrowed." Chen Chongqing couldn't see her true thoughts and said, "What do you think?" Su Yurong asked back, "And what do you think? Although my master and I are now strangers because of this matter, when it comes to this matter itself, I really don't know who is right and who is wrong. Chen Chongqing said, if you look at it from the matter of them using Zhoutong, I feel that they are both wrong. Su Yorong said, so you feel that there is no reason to deal with another mistake for one. Chen Chongqing said, I just feel that I can't convince myself. Su Yorong calmly said, that makes sense, but you don't have to try to convince me, and you don't have to worry about me either, because I'm not prepared to do anything. I cultivate the Great Tao, and the Empress also cultivates the Great Tao. If she still has a strand of her soul in the sea of stars and knows of this, she probably wouldn't want me to spend my time on such trifling matters. Chen Chongqing did not say anything. Logically speaking, Su Yorong had just worked with Shang Xingzhou, so there shouldn't be anything to worry about. However, he still felt that something was wrong. Su Yorong continued, if I really wanted to do something, I would definitely tell you in advance. Moreover, how could the venerable Taoist not sense it? Chen Chongqing felt slightly relieved, because he knew that Su Yorong wouldn't lie to him. Su Yorong did not speak of this matter. Gazing at the academy wall deep in the forest, she asked, is that the Orthodox Academy over there? Chen Chongqing was very familiar with this forest. He said, it's just over the wall. Since he came to the herb garden, there was no reason not to go to the Tradition Academy. Chen Chongqing walked towards that direction. Su Yorong was too late, because she took an extra look at the meadow. Her eyes were calm. The Divine Empress was buried there, in a very, very deep place in the ground. In her heart there was also a very, very deep place. The gray-black academy wall was somewhat tall and very old. It was unknown how many years of wind and rain it had experienced. However, the door on the academy wall was clearly not old. Whether it was the door frame or the mortar in the cracks, it was at most a few years old. The door that suddenly appeared on the grayish-black wall of the courtyard looked like a smiling mouth. Chen Chongqing seemed to see the little girl who pushed open the door and walked out. He couldn't help but laugh. Pushing open the academy door, he arrived at the Orthodox Academy. On the other side of the academy wall, there were no steaming wooden barrels. Tang 36 had already left the Heavenly Tao Academy for many years and now lived in the Orthodox Academy. If he once again ran away in wet clothes, where would he go to borrow clothes to wear? That small building was still in its original place. Chen Chongqing had lived in this small building for a very long time. He very familiarly walked in. Upon entering the first floor, he could see a room. It was Zheshio's. The building was very quiet, as if there was not a single person. Whether it was the corridors or the layout, nothing had changed from 3 years ago. Su Mou and Tang 36 lived on the second floor. His room was on the third floor. The room had not changed at all, but it was clear that it had been frequently cleaned. It could be said to be spotless. That row of plain Taoist robes of varying shades was still hanging in the wardrobe, the books on the bookshelf were still there, and the bedding was still neat and tidy. It seemed like he had never left, or that these 3 years had not existed. Su Yorong pointed at an empty spot on the bookshelf and asked, "What about that thing I gave you when you were little? When I leave, I usually bring it with me." Chen Chongqing used his finger to pick up that very old bamboo dragonfly. Su Yorong carefully took it and then very carefully placed it on the bookshelf. Seeing this sight, Chen Chongqing felt rather warm, but he also suddenly felt rather strange. He remembered that Su Yorong should not have come to his room in the Orthodox Academy, so how did she know that a bamboo dragonfly had once been placed there? He turned to Su Yorong, wanting to ask her. Su Yorong's expression was very calm, but her cheeks were a little red. She rushed to say, "It's a little old, I'll make you a new one in the future." Chen Chongqing knew that he could not ask any further, so he smiled and agreed. Walking out of the house and across the lawn, they arrived at the lakeside. The great banyan tree bore countless streaks of snow. It looked very beautiful, but it also made one worry whether or not it could endure the cold. With a slight gust of wind, Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong stood on a thick branch, snow rustling down. In the past, you used to stand here and look at the capital? That's right, we felt that it was very nice to look at the scenery like this. What's across from us? The small kitchen. It was later destroyed by Wucheong Bai and then rebuilt. Now no one uses it, but I heard that the firewood and kitchen utensils are all very well prepared. Only waiting for Xian Yuanpo to return? When he next returns to the capital, he should already be a great general of the demi-human race. In the light snow, the capital was very quiet, and the Orthodox Academy was also very quiet. In the distance, a faint sound could be heard. If one listened carefully, it should be many people reading in unison. The Orthodox Academy was very large, and the place that Chen Changxing used to live in was only a very small part of it. He knew that the present was no longer the same. He wanted to go there and see, so Su Yorong naturally had no objections. Following the sound of reading, they walked past the library, the gatehouse where Jin Yu Lu had roasted 3 deer, the fountain that had finally been completely repaired, and entered a forest. The dormitory of the Orthodox Academy was on the other side of the forest. The sound of reading grew clearer and clearer. Interestingly, the forest seemed to grow quieter and quieter. Suddenly, the sound of crying came from ahead. Chen Changxing looked over. A youth was leaning against a tree, wiping away his tears. The youth's clothes were very ordinary. He did not come from a rich family, but he was also probably not from a poor family. The youth's face was covered in bruises. It was obvious that he had been beaten. Su Yorong prepared to go over and ask. At this moment, the sound of hurried footsteps came from outside the forest, as well as laughter and cursing. Today we have to get through to Shuebaoqin. Right, we can't let him run away again. Right, let's see if he dares to come to our Orthodox Academy again. Chapter 8. Last night, I was in a rush to pick up my leader, so I didn't think clearly when I was writing. There was a very obvious mistake in yesterday's chapter. Back then, Chen Changxing took Su Yurong to walk around the Tradition Academy, and they even met Tang 36. Although they didn't walk very carefully that time, and Chen Changxing knew that she went to the Tradition Academy that night, so he shouldn't be suspicious of how she knew the location of the bamboo dragonfly. I apologize to everyone. In the future, when I write, I will be more careful. But after thinking about it, I decided not to change it. First of all, I'm really lazy and tired. Second of all, I really like this scene. I especially like the scene of returning to the old place after so many years. I like them walking and talking like this. If life is only like first meeting, then she was originally the girl of first meeting. Then I will force every meeting to be like the first meeting. Also, I recommend a book to everyone. Laughing Corpse Queen Meng Meng, the youngster heard the noise coming from outside the forest. His face showed a frightened expression. He turned around and prepared to leave, but it was already too late. Accompanied by the sound of hurried footsteps, 10 youngsters ran into the forest and surrounded the youngster. Looking at the young man's bruised face and dusty appearance, some of the youths looked at him with disdain and ridicule. However, there were even more youths whose eyes began to shine with excitement. It seemed that they were prepared to bully the young man even more. Chen Changxing and Su Yurong were also in the forest, but they were blocked by a few plum bushes and were not discovered by these people. After seeing the youngster's miserable appearance, his face darkened. After hearing the youngster's name and seeing the school uniforms that the youngsters were wearing, his face became even uglier. The youngster used his sleeve to wipe away the tears on his face and said with a trembling voice, "If you keep doing this, I will report it to the teacher." "Didn't you already report it last month? Did you not go again just now?" A young student looked at him and mocked. "What teacher would care about your business?" The youngster gathered his courage and said, "His Holiness the Pope is back. He will come to the Tradition Academy." Hearing this, the faces of the young students changed slightly. Their eyes showed some uneasiness. Soon, that uneasiness turned into hatred. The young student harshly rebuked, Do you think that with His Holiness the Pope's return to the capital, you have a backer? Just what sort of powerful personage was the Pope? How could he care about such minor matters? Besides, you're the son of a sinner. You don't have the right to study here. A pained expression appeared on the young man's face as he forced himself to say, "Mother said that it was His Holiness the Pope who told me to come here to study." Can you believe your mother's crazy words? If you stay here, you will only cause trouble for the Orthodox Academy. We want to drive you away, but it is also for the sake of the Orthodox Academy. No one can say anything wrong about us, so don't blame us for being cruel. If you want to blame someone, blame that stupid mother of yours. Those young students rushed towards the youth, their mouths still cursing non-stop. Su Yurong glanced at Chen Chongqing and said, "I'll go take a look." After saying this, she left. She knew that Chen Chongqing didn't want to see these things, and he also didn't want others to see these things, even if that person was her. This was a matter of the Orthodox Academy. The Orthodox Academy was his, Luo Luo's, Xian Yuan Po's, Tang 36 and Su Mo's. A young student used his leg to kick the youth. With a crisp clap, a pebble pierced through the air and accurately struck the student's knee. The student couldn't bear the pain and fell to the ground, clutching his leg and rolling around, crying. Those students were shocked and hurriedly helped the student up. They looked around the forest and shouted, "Who is it?" The plum bushes were slightly ruffled and a chilly wind brushed past. Chen Chongqing arrived at the scene and looked at the youth called Xue Baoqin. He asked, "You are the son of Divine General Xue?" Hearing the title of Divine General Xue, the youth froze for a moment before responding and nodding his head. Those young students were very shocked. On the night of the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, Xue Xingchuan was poisoned to death by Zhou Tong. As the most powerful military general of the Tian High government, even after his death, he still didn't have peace and his corpse was exposed outside the city for over 10 days. 3 years had passed, but when Xue Xingchuan was mentioned, no one called him Divine General Xue, not even Lord Xue. Those generals that he had personally raised and those battle-hardened subordinates of his naturally had a difficult time in the new government, passing their days in Song province. Madame Xue and young master, who remained in the capital, also had a difficult time. If it weren't for the fact that the Li Palace would occasionally send people to check on them, that Mou would visit them twice upon her return to the capital, and that Prince Chen Lu would secretly look after them, they would probably have been expelled from the road of peace long ago. But it was very obvious that this young Master Xue's days in the Orthodox Academy were also very difficult. Those young students asked with uneasy expressions, "Who are you?" Chen Chongqing ignored them and said to Xue Baoqin, "You should tell this sort of thing to the instructor." Xue Baoqin felt very wronged, the rims of her eyes turning red. She said in a trembling voice, "I told him, but the instructor didn't care, and then they beat me even more fiercely." Chen Chongqing thought of the conversation he had heard earlier and thought that it really was the case, but how could it be? If the instructor doesn't care, then you should find someone who can discipline the instructor, like your vice principal Su. In the last few years, he, Luoluo, Tang 36, and Zhixiu had all been absent from the capital, so the Orthodox Academy had been managed by Su Mou alone. Su Mou was now the vice principal of the Orthodox Academy. Xue Baoqin felt even more wronged upon hearing this. He thought, "I'm just an ordinary student. How can I meet an important figure like Principal Su whenever I want to?" Chen Chongqing said, "If you tell your mother about this matter, your mother will naturally find a way to meet him." Xue Baoqin replied, "As a son, how can I make my mother worry?" Chen Chongqing was very pleased with his reaction. Smiling, he said, "Then come with me. I'll take you to see him." After saying this, he led Xue Baoqin out of the forest. Those tensome young students wanted to stop him, but they realized that they couldn't even move their feet, so they didn't dare to pursue. In their view, this person was about the same age as them, but he had a serene and noble aura that no one dared to look down on. The Orthodox Academy was not a place that could be casually entered and exited. They were sure that they had never seen a classmate like this, nor had they seen any young teacher like this. Just who was this person? Suddenly, they thought of a possibility. The student whose knee had been injured by the stone was supported by his companions, using his left leg to stand. Suddenly, his leg went soft and he fell to the ground. The faces of the other young students instantly turned pale, whiter than the snow outside the forest. In the deepest part of a building on the west side of the Orthodox Academy, Suemoyu glanced at the teacher in front of him, his eyes revealing loathing and anger. In the end, he suppressed it and turned to the window. In a little while, an academy council will be convened to reprimand them. Those students will be punished according to the rules of the academy. The teacher had his head lowered, constantly wiping away his sweat. Occasionally, he couldn't help but raise his head to glance at the window. A young man was standing by the window. It turned out that the Pope really was this young. It turned out that the Pope really was on good terms with the Shui estate. Back then, there was no one in the capital who did not know that Chen Chongxing had attended to Shui Xingchuan's funeral, but many people believed that it was just a moment of impulse. The teacher felt a deep sense of regret. Chen Chongxing turned around and looked at Suemoyu. His expression did not change, but his mood was rather strange. Suemoyu's punishment was rather light, but it was still acceptable. He had never imagined that his appearance would cause this teacher and those young students to bear even greater responsibility. But he was somewhat confused. How could someone as steady, upright, stern, and meticulous as Suemoyu allow such a thing to happen in the Orthodox Academy? Suemoyu should have been well aware that Shui Xingchuan's son entering the Orthodox Academy to study was his arrangement. And in handling this matter, Suemoyu seemed to be in some sort of difficulty. This was the Orthodox Academy. To handle a teacher and 10-some students, what sort of difficulty could there be? Chen Chongxing turned to the teacher and suddenly felt that he was rather familiar. Then, he suddenly remembered an old matter. 3 years ago, the Orthodox Academy was surrounded by black-armored cavalry. The disciples of South Stream Temple and Suemoyu were guarding the academy gate, the two sides in a standoff, the situation extremely tense. Just as Eunuch Lin was about to forcefully break into the academy, 10-some students and several teachers left the Orthodox Academy through the back door. At the time, Suemoyu had noted down the names of those students and teachers. Afterwards, Chen Chongxing had also seen the list. If he remembered correctly, the instructor in front of him was one of those people. This person had actually returned to the Orthodox Academy? Could it be that those teachers and students had also returned to the Orthodox Academy? Just what had happened in the Orthodox Academy? Chen Chongxing looked at Suemoyu and asked, "Who allowed him to return?" Suemoyu knew that he had already recognized him. He sighed and prepared to explain the matter. The Orthodox Academy's teacher, Mei Chuan, pays his respects to His Holiness the Pope. A voice came from outside the room. Chen Chongxing turned to Suemoyu. Suemoyu nodded, the expression on his face rather complex. To be continued. Chapter 9. I made a mistake again. Shui Baoqin should be called Shui Yejin, nicknamed Brother Jean. I don't know what I was thinking when I was writing that chapter the day before yesterday. Yesterday, when I followed up, I felt that there might be a problem, so I flipped to the front, but I didn't find it. Then, when I was writing, the leader looked at me and said that this name, TSK, really. I asked her, "Is there anyone who doesn't like Shui Baoqin?" Thanks to Book Friend, Young Master Sure and the 72 cups of wine for the correction. I changed it very quickly yesterday. I hope everyone didn't see it. I was the one who allowed this instructor and those students to return. He also reported to me about the Shui family's child. If there's a mistake, it's my fault. Please forgive me, Lord Zong. After hearing these 3 sentences, The way Chen Chongqing looked at the bishop named Mei Chuan changed a little. Bishop Mei Chuan's manner of speaking was very gentle. His bearing was very elegant and his etiquette was perfect. Even though the person he was talking to was Chen Chongqing, he still gave off a feeling that he was neither servile nor overbearing. Chen Chongqing felt that this person had a familiar feeling, but the most important question was, when did the Tradition Academy have a professor? Suemo, you said, you are the education overseer. Why is it that when a teacher condones those students to commit evil, not only do you not punish them, but you also protect them? Mei Chuan calmly said, the Orthodox Academy is a holy ground. How could the son of a sinner be blasphemed? I'm doing this for the sake of the Academy. Chen Chongqing looked at Bishop Mei Chuan. The sense of familiarity was becoming more and more obvious. Bishop Mei Chuan smiled and prepared to continue explaining his thoughts. He seemed very calm, but he was actually rather nervous. After all, his actions were highly likely to offend the Pope. More importantly, he was prepared to use this matter and the words that followed, as well as the relationship between the two of them, to obtain more benefits. Unfortunately, Chen Chongqing didn't give him the chance to continue. Chen Chongqing had a faint feeling that if he were to continue talking with the other, he would end up with a result that he was unwilling to accept. In other words, before Bishop Mei Chuan took the initiative to show up, he had already prepared the process and rhythm of the conversation. The people who were best at interrupting the rhythm and process of a conversation were usually the unreasonable and unruly people. Chen Chongqing couldn't do it, but the Tradition Academy never lacked such people. He turned to Suemo Yu and asked, where is he? Suemo Yu pointed to the back and said, I drank too much last night and slept in there. Wake him up. Chen Chongqing said, if I remember correctly, this is something that the supervisor should be in charge of. The superintendent of the Tradition Academy was Tang 36. When it came to being unreasonable, no one was better than him at it. Who asked him to be so rich? Tang 36 rubbed his eyes and walked into the room in his pajamas. After listening to Suemo Yu's simple description, he yawned. He then looked at the teacher who had allowed the students to beat and humiliate Shui Yejin and said, Scram. His voice was not very loud. Of course, it did not sound like thunder, but it was very crisp, like a radish that had been soaked in water for an entire night being bitten in half. The instructor immediately broke out in a sweat. He looked at Bishop Mei Chuan and did not dare delay any further. He quickly retreated. 3 years ago, he had been an instructor in the Orthodox Academy and was well aware of the temperament of this academy superintendent. If he did not hurry up and leave, then roll out of the Orthodox Academy, then he might never have the chance to roll out in this lifetime. Mei Chuan slightly arched his brows, apparently not expecting this young master of the Tang clan to have such prestige in the Orthodox Academy. Tang 36 looked at him. Mei Chuan had already mentally prepared himself. When the other opened his mouth to tell him to scram, he knew how to smile so that he would not care. But Tang 36 did not say this word, instead asking, Who are you? Mei Chuan stared blankly for a long while before responding, saying, I am the education overseer of the Orthodox Academy. Tang 36 asked, When did the Orthodox Academy have an education overseer that I didn't even know about? To be sent by the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education to such an important place as the Orthodox Academy as an education overseer, Mei Chuan's background was naturally unusual. So Tang 36 was not prepared to ask about his background, nor was he prepared to give him a chance to say anything. This was precisely why Chen Chongqing had him appear. But Mei Chuan's reaction was faster than expected. He ignored Tang 36, turning to Chen Chongqing and saying, The deceased Archbishop Mei Li Sha is my uncle. So he was Mei Li Sha's nephew. As expected, Chen Chongqing's conjecture had been verified, so he naturally understood why Suemo Yu was in such a difficult situation. The entire continent knew of Mei Li Sha's relationship with him, and the Orthodox Academy. The room was quiet for a very long time. I only want to ask one question. Tang 36 looked at Mei Chuan and asked, "Why did you agree to let those teachers and students return?" Mei Chuan's expression did not change as he calmly replied, "The decisions of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education must comply with His Majesty's decree." This question was not wrong. The Orthodox Academy was one of the 6 ivies and was under the direct jurisdiction of the Li Palace, but it was still in the capital, on the territory of the Great Zhou. The problem was that everyone knew that this could not be the Emperor's decree. It could only be Shang Xingzhou's will. "I understand." Tang 36 also appeared very calm. He said to Mei Chuan, "Could I trouble Sir to temporarily leave so that we can discuss things?" Mei Chuan smiled. "Of course." After saying this, he bowed to Chen Changsheng and retreated from the room. The room once more fell silent for a very long time. Tang 36 looked at Chen Changsheng. Chen Changsheng said nothing. Mo had not mentioned these matters in her letter, as she was not a member of the Orthodoxy, so it was impossible for her to know of the undercurrents hidden beneath the surface. But they all knew very well that the problem lay in the Bureau of Traditional Education. The Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education managed the 5 ivies and was the most important sacred hall of the Li Palace. It had an extremely special status in the Orthodoxy. Mei Lisha and Mao Qiu you were the 2 archbishops with the highest status and the most seniority. The Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education had always been within the sphere of influence of the Orthodoxy's conservative faction. It had been at odds with the Orthodoxy's new faction, represented by Linghai Zhiwang and Daoist Siyuan, for many years. In the process of the Orthodox Academy's rebirth, the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education and the late Archbishop Mei Lisha played an extremely important role. In the eyes of a normal person, the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education should act as it did in the past, supporting the Orthodox Academy, supporting Chen Changsheng who had already become the Pope. But Chen Changsheng knew this wasn't the case. The reason the conservative faction of the Orthodoxy had supported the Orthodox Academy was not because of him, but because of his teacher. In other words, they had always been supporting his teacher. To them, the Tradition Academy had never belonged to Chen Changsheng, and it definitely didn't belong to youngsters like Tang 36. From start to finish, the Orthodox Academy should have belonged to Shang Xingzhou, to those old friends who had died for the faith. In the 3 years that Chen Changsheng had been away from the capital, the Li Palace had sealed off the opening array, making it rather difficult for anyone to extend a hand into it. But the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education was outside the Li Palace, and under Shang Xingzhou's prestige and methods, the conservative faction of the Orthodoxy was gaining more and more control over the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education. They naturally wanted to wrest back control of the Orthodox Academy, or at the very least, they wanted to regain enough influence. It was already rather difficult for Su Moyu to last until now. Tang 36 looked at Su Moyu and asked, "Principal Mao?" This was the problem he was most worried about. Su Moyu replied, "Principal Mao has been in seclusion for a long time. These matters should have nothing to do with him." Both Tang 36 and Chen Changsheng breathed a sigh of relief at this answer. But the problem facing the Orthodox Academy was still very difficult to resolve. The Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education, or perhaps Shang Xingzhou, was very shrewd and ruthless. The person they had chosen was very thorny. Not even Tang 36 could tell him to scram. After all, Mei Chuan was Mei Lisha's relative. Tang 36 looked at Chen Changsheng and said, "But this is the Orthodox Academy." Chen Changsheng was quiet for a very long time, then replied, "Yes." Tang 36 said, "I didn't tell him to scram because I knew that it was meaningless." Chen Changsheng fell silent again, then replied, "Yes." Tang 36 turned and walked out of the room. Su Moyu vaguely guessed at what Tang 36 was preparing to do. His expression suddenly changed as he stood up, preparing to stop him. But Chen Changsheng said nothing more. Su Moyu's voice trembled as he asked, "Is there a need for this?" Chapter 10. Today is Sister Sandbag and the Fire Beacon's birthday, and also Chen Chongqing's birthday. I wish them a happy birthday. Some of my reading friends are definitely celebrating their birthdays today. I also wish you a happy birthday. I suddenly realized that every day a reader will be celebrating their birthday, so I wish you a happy birthday in advance. Before Tang 36 found him, Mei Chuan encountered Su Yorong in the forest. He had never met Su Yorong, but he knew who she was. Just as Tang 36 had said in the forest, she was truly very beautiful. Mei Chuan was rather surprised, but his etiquette and demeanor in greeting were still impeccable. He was also rather surprised that Su Yorong knew that he was the new education overseer of the Orthodox Academy and also knew of his relationship with Mei Lisha. Thus, Mei Chuan could not be sure if this meeting was a coincidence or not. Su Yorong said to Mei Chuan, "The Orthodox Academy is very important to them." Mei Chuan humbly replied, "This lowly officer knows." Su Yorong said, "But you do not understand what they will do for the Orthodox Academy." Academy Supervisor Tang told that teacher to scram. He probably won't dare to come to the Orthodox Academy ever again. Mei Chuan sighed. His initial teaching of the essay on the origin of the Tao was truly excellent. Su Yorong asked, "Tang didn't tell you to scram?" Mei Chuan froze for a moment before respectfully replying, "He did not." Su Yorong was quiet for a while, then said, "So that's how it is." Mei Chuan appeared surprised. Su Yorong softly explained, "He didn't tell you to scram, which means he wanted you dead." Mei Chuan's expression flickered. Su Yorong shook her head. "I feel that what they did was wrong." Mei Chuan's tense mood somewhat relaxed. "This is the Orthodox Academy, and you are the education overseer sent by the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education. If they act, they will never be able to explain themselves to the priests and believers." Su Yorong calmly gazed at him and said, "But I do not need an explanation." Mei Chuan's mind, which had just relaxed, tensed up once more. "My lady's meaning is?" "My meaning is that since I do not need an explanation and the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education does not dare ask me for an explanation, then I should be the one to kill you." A wind blew from the forest, ruffling the snow-laden mountain plum blossoms and rustling her clothes. Her eyes were as tranquil and gentle as usual. There were no negative emotions in them, much less killing intent. Bishop Mei Chuan asked with confusion and a hint of hope, "You want to kill me? If you were just an instructor of the Orthodox Academy, I wouldn't care. But you are Mei Lisha's nephew, so I can only kill you myself." Su Yorong was still as calm as ever, as if she was not talking about killing someone, but discussing the Tao of the heavenly tome monoliths. This calmness made Bishop Mei Chuan feel an unprecedented fear and chill, so much so that his voice began to tremble. If Su Yorong really did kill him, let alone the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education, not even the Li Palace or the Imperial Court could do anything. Would the Li Palace and the Imperial Court demand that the Holy Maiden of the South pay for a bishop's life? If Sir kills me in the Orthodox Academy, the unification of the orthodoxy that Sir and His Holiness are pushing forward will be greatly affected. Bishop Mei Chuan's voice trembled slightly, but his expression was very sincere. It was as if he was wholeheartedly thinking for the other party. Su Yorong's reply was very indifferent, but at the same time, it also meant that it was terrifying. "I don't care." After saying this, the temple sword appeared in her hand. Bishop Mei Chuan's pupils constricted. His right hand floated up like a floating cloud, blocking in front of him. At the same time, his body blurred as he prepared to retreat. It was too late. There was a light swish. Bishop Mei Chuan's right hand left his wrist and fell. The temple sword had pierced through his chest. With a buzzing sound, some seemingly indistinct sparks, like wild plums, drifted out of the temple sword. These were all the true flames of the heavenly phoenix. All life was extinguished by these indistinct sparks. Bishop Mei Chuan was a star condensation expert, but in front of Su Yorong, let alone a chance at victory, he couldn't even block her. The gap in cultivation between the two was far too great. More importantly, even when the temple sword brought death to his body, he still did not believe that Su Yorong could kill him. He was not just himself. He was an instructor sent by the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education. He represented the collective will of the conservative faction of the orthodoxy. He was the hand that Shang Xingzhou had extended towards the Orthodox Academy. Even if you were the holy maiden of the South, in the face of this hand, should you not negotiate, mutually concede, and finally reach a compromise? Bishop Mei Chuan felt all this to be utterly absurd, his pale face brimming with disbelief. He sat on the snow, vomiting blood, and then gradually losing his breath. The forest was quiet. A voice came from somewhere, a voice brimming with complex emotions. Even if you killed him, you still needed to give a reason. Su Yorong calmly replied, I said before that I don't care. I just need people to know that I killed him. The person sighed, No wonder you invited me here. Su Yorong replied, Yes, I wanted you to see it. Upon learning of this matter, she had resolved to kill Bishop Mei Chuan, so she had come to the Orthodox Academy and invited that person in the forest. But she had not expected that Chen Chongqing would meet this person ahead of time, which inevitably added to the troubles. Yes, this king saw it. A young man walked out of the forest. He was dressed in the robes of a king, his face handsome and spirited. Compared to the past, he was even more graceful and noble. Prince Chen Lu. His father, the Prince of Xiang, was the most powerful prince in the great Zhou imperial court. After breaking into the divine, his status had become even more special, and as the only member of the Chen imperial clan left behind in the capital, his status had always been special. Coupled with the rumored admiration Shang Xingzhou had for him, Prince Chen Lu was unquestionably the most popular person in the capital. But to Su Yorong, he was still that companion from 10-some years ago who had studied with her in the imperial palace. Prince Chen Lu probably viewed her in the same way. So when he saw her kill Bishop Mei Chuan, his thoughts did not linger too much on how to deal with the aftermath, but on her heart. I didn't think that you would have such deep feelings for Chen Chongqing. Prince Chen Lu sighed. In the past, I would never have imagined that you would do so much for a man. Bishop Mei Chuan was the hand that Shang Xingzhou had extended into the Orthodox Academy. How to deal with it? Anyone who was sufficiently calm and intelligent would know that this hand had to be cut off. But the relationship between Bishop Mei Chuan and Mei Lisha made this matter extremely complicated. Shang Xingzhou's status in the great Zhou imperial court and the orthodoxy was too high. If Chen Chongqing wanted to oppose his teacher, besides his status as pope, he needed to constantly increase his prestige. Prestige originated from cultivation and strength, but it was also related to one's reputation. Under the Li Palace's propaganda and the influence of Anhua and her fanatical followers, Chen Chongqing's prestige in the continent was growing higher and higher. This prestige came from the cinnabar pill, from the simultaneous attack of 10,000 swords on the battlefield with the demons 3 years ago, from that falling boulder in White Emperor City. It had been accumulated through Chen Chongqing's blood and sweat, his impeccable virtue, and a very long period of time. If he killed Mei Lisha's descendant, it would deal a massive blow to his prestige. In more mundane terms, it would dirty his hands. Su Yorong knew that Chen Chongqing would find this very difficult. She had guessed that Tang 36 would not make things difficult for Chen Chongqing. But Tang 36 was also a member of the Orthodox Academy. Just now, as they walked along the lake and gazed into the distance from the banyan tree, she had felt a slight regret that she had not been able to participate in Chen Chongqing's past. Now that she thought about it, this was a very good thing. She was not a member of the Orthodox Academy. She could kill. The cry of a crane startled the entire Orthodox Academy from its sleep. The snow on the branches of the trees rustled down. Several dozen teachers and students walked out of the school building, following the cry of the crane, and then into the forest. Several cries of alarm rose from the forest. To be continued. Chapter 11. Tang 36 arrived a bit late. He went back to the small building to get his sword. When he came back from the bamboo corridor, the forest was already full of people. The mountain plums had been trampled into a mess. Bishop Mei Chuan's body lay in the snow in the middle of the crowd. There were also a few spots of dark red blood. At this sight, he very naturally put the Wenshuai sword behind his back and asked an instructor, "What's going on here?" The instructor's face was pale, and he said with a trembling voice, "I heard that the instructor disrespected the saintess," so Tang 36 froze. He didn't know that Su Yorong had also come to the Orthodox Academy, and he certainly didn't think that she had killed Bishop Mei Chuan. He asked, "Where is the saintess?" "She has already left." The instructor thought that he didn't believe his words and quickly added, "Prince Chen Lu was also present and testified." Tang 36 didn't understand why the young prince he disliked the most would come to the Tradition Academy. Did he have an appointment with Su Yorong? Looking at Bishop Mei Chuan's corpse, he raised his eyebrows slightly and said, "So that's how it is. Damn it." Su Moyu's voice came from outside the forest. The teachers and students quickly dispersed. Chen Chongsheng had unknowingly arrived at the scene. He stared at Bishop Mei Chuan's corpse in silence for a long time. Tang 36 asked, "When are you returning to the Li Palace?" The Pope naturally returned to the Li Palace. This time could not be pushed back forever. When Chen Chongsheng returned to the Li Palace, he had to confront the internal problems of the orthodoxy. Bishop Mei Chuan's death would not make the problem simpler, but it would make the solution simpler. In a sense, Su Yorong had already made a choice for Chen Chongsheng. "Su Mo," you said from the side, "the Radiant Assembly will be held tonight." Tang 36 said, "How will the Department of Traditional Education react?" Su Moyu said, "While Principal Mao is in seclusion, the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education will be under the jurisdiction of the 3 cardinals." Tang 36 asked, "Are they all from that side?" Su Moyu replied, "Yes." Tang 36 was silent for a while, then said, "Then we can't choose from among them." Chen Chongsheng and Su Mo Yu both understood his meaning. Mao Qiuyu was already very close to breaking into the divine. Perhaps he would succeed in several dozen days, perhaps even less. Based on the way the orthodoxy had always conducted itself, Mao Qiuyu would possess an official sacred name, his status even more revered, but he would no longer be able to hold the position of Archbishop of the Hall of Illustrious Persons or any other official position. Everyone could understand the reason behind this. The question was who would take over the most important position of Archbishop of the Hall of Illustrious Persons. If we exclude the 3 extremely senior cardinals, then the most qualified person to take charge of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education is Principal Zhuang. Hearing this, Chen Chongsheng and Tang 36 became silent. The Principal Zhuang that Su Moyu mentioned was the current principal of the Heavenly Tao Academy, Zhuang Jihuan. The Heavenly Tao Academy had a very high status within the orthodoxy, and Zhuang Jihuan was not lacking in cultivation or experience. Moreover, he had always been highly regarded by Mao Qiuyu. Although the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education belonged to the conservative faction, Zhuang Jihuan had been rather objective and neutral in the last few years, and he had carried out the tasks assigned to him by the Li Palace with great efficiency. No matter how one looked at it, he was the best successor to Mao Qiuyu, and Chen Chongsheng couldn't oppose him. But everyone knew how his own son, Zhuang Huanyu, had died. Tang 36 wanted to object, but he found himself unable to do so. Zhuang Jihuan was a good friend of his parents, and when he first came to the capital, he had always been taken care of by him. Chen Chongsheng brought Shui Yejin out of the Orthodox Academy, while Tang 36 stayed behind to deal with the aftermath. He sent someone to deliver Mei Chuan's body to the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education, and then he summoned all the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy. Su Moyu took out a rather old piece of paper and gave it to Tang 36. This was a list of names that had been written 3 years ago. Tang 36 looked at the names on the paper and asked, "Why is it always me who offends people?" "Because you're skilled at offending people and aren't afraid of offending people," Su Moyu very seriously explained. "And you like doing this sort of thing." Tang 36 thought it over, then said, "Although these words sound like a bastard, if you think about them carefully, they truly do have some truth to them." The teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy stood on the stone platform in front of the Academy gate, listening to this conversation with nervous mood. The Pope had come to the Orthodox Academy and the Holy Maiden had killed the education overseer. No matter how they looked at it, the Orthodox Academy was about to have a major incident today. What would Deputy Director Su and the Dean, whom he hadn't seen for a long time, do next? Tang 36 began to read the names on the list. Zhang Lintao, Huang Ziqing, He Shuyu, Guo Xian, Lu Yu. The instructors and students who were called by Tang 36 stood out from the crowd. Their faces were pale and they were very nervous. 3 years ago, at the Orthodox Academy's most dangerous moment, they had chosen to leave. Afterwards, they had been approved by the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education to return. They had no idea how Tang 36 would deal with them. "Let's go, what are you all standing around for?" Tang 36 suddenly felt rather bored. "In the future, don't let me see any of you in the Orthodox Academy again." The tensome teachers and students walked out of the academy with lowered heads, sullen faces. Even though they were somewhat unwilling, they did not dare to show it. Tang 36 suddenly thought of something and said, "Teachers, remember to return all the salary you receive tomorrow." Hearing these words, those teachers walking out of the academy couldn't help but feel their legs go soft. One of the expelled students finally could not help but indignantly ask, "Then will our tuition be refunded?" Tang 36 smiled at that student and said, "If you dare to accept it." The teachers were startled and hurriedly grabbed that student and dragged him out of the academy, afraid that if they delayed any longer, Tang 36 would change his mind. The 100 Flowers Lane outside the Orthodox Academy was usually very lively, and today, many people had come to watch. Seeing those dejected teachers and students being expelled from the Orthodox Academy, especially those 2 young and incessantly weeping students, one couldn't help but feel a little sympathy. Tang 36 had never left any leeway in his actions, so how could he have forgotten these details? He had long ago dispatched an eloquent teacher to stand at the academy's gate and loudly narrate the reason for the expulsion of these teachers and students. He narrated the story of how the Orthodox Academy was surrounded 3 years ago in such a vivid and lifelike manner. The crowd instantly changed the way they looked at those teachers and students. Some people even cursed and spat in front of them. Tang 36 didn't really care how miserable those teachers and students would be in the future. He was very clear that no matter if it was the other 5 Ivies or the other normal academies, they would definitely not dare to accept these people. What he was more concerned about was whether the current Orthodox Academy was still the Orthodox Academy from 3 years ago or whether it was still the Orthodox Academy that he and Chen Changxing wanted to see. The gate of the academy was tightly shut, blocking out the cursing and discussions in the 100 Flowers Lane. The academy that was snowing was unusually quiet. More than 100 teachers and students stood in the snow, not moving an inch. Seeing this scene, Tang 36 was a little satisfied. A few years ago, when the Pope walked into the 100 Flowers Lane, this place was very quiet. The 4 words, Orthodox Academy, were completely covered by green vines. The inside of the school was full of weeds and broken walls. It was even quieter than the outside, or in other words, deathly silent. At that time, the Orthodox Academy was actually a tomb. He looked at the teachers and students and said, afterwards Princess Luo Luo, Xian Yuan Pe, and then me, all came here one after another. Only then did this place gradually become lively. I can say without shame that it was us and the Pope who changed everything and gave the Orthodox Academy a new life. Suemo, you thought of the story from a few years ago and felt a little emotional. Tang 36 continued, since it's a new life, then it naturally isn't the old. The teachers and students looked at him in a daze, not understanding what he meant by this. I hope you all understand one thing. Tang 36's expression was calm and determined. The current Tradition Academy, and the Tradition Academy from a few decades ago, have nothing to do with each other. Chapter 12. Today is Su Yurong's birthday, and also a friend's birthday. The two chapters one wrote the day before yesterday were dedicated to them and to you. The Orthodox Academy was one of the 6 ivies. It had an extremely long history and had once flourished in the capital. 20-some years ago, a bloody incident occurred in the Orthodox Academy. Countless teachers and students died tragically. From then on, the Orthodox Academy became a graveyard and was gradually forgotten. Those citizens of the capital that still remembered it did not dare to mention it. After Chen Chongqing came to the capital from Xining village, the Tradition Academy reappeared in front of the world. And then came the coup of the Mausoleum of Books. The current status of the Orthodox Academy was very special. Both the Imperial Court and the Li Palace attached great importance to the Orthodox Academy. All sorts of resources were flowing into the depths of 100 Blossom Street. In just 3 short years, the Orthodox Academy had returned to its former glory. Its status had faintly surpassed the other ivies and was about to be on par with the Heavenly Tao Academy. Otherwise, why would those teachers and students who had once escaped spend so much effort to return? History had always been written by the victors, and glory would only belong to the person who stood at the highest point of the Mausoleum of Books. The Tradition Academy was reborn and regained its glory because of the appearance of Chen Chongqing. Right now, the position of principal of the Orthodox Academy was still held by him. But in the view of many, the Orthodox Academy was still Shang Xingzhou's Orthodox Academy. The Orthodox Academy's glory in the Grand Examination and the Mausoleum of Books had also been attributed to Shang Xingzhou by many people. Because Shang Xingzhou was the most important and most influential principal in the history of the Orthodox Academy. And Chen Chongqing was his student. He had come from Xining to the capital and then entered the Orthodox Academy to study. All these matters had been arranged by Shang Xingzhou. This was a very clear inheritance. Who knows how many beautiful articles have been written by the scholars employed by the imperial court. The Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education had prepared to erect a stele outside the gate to record this period of history. To the Orthodoxy's conservative faction, this was just a cleansing of the root. But to the Orthodox Academy, this was undoubtedly an erosion. If it wasn't for Su Mou's unwavering persistence, if it wasn't for Li Palace's constant vigilance, if it wasn't for Mao Qiu placing some sort of restriction on the education board before he went into seclusion, then perhaps the traces that Chen Chongqing had left within Orthodox Academy would have long since been wiped clean. At this time, Chen Chongqing returned to the capital. The hand that the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education had extended towards the Orthodox Academy was calmly cut off by Su Yorong. Tang 36 made a declaration to the entire capital and even the entire continent. This declaration was powerful. Like a clap of thunder, it exploded in the wind and snow and quickly spread to every corner of Jingdou. The current Orthodox Academy had made the most absolute separation from the Orthodox Academy of the past. Upon hearing this news, those who hoped that Shang Xingzhou and Chen Chongqing could mend their relationship felt extremely disappointed. Those ambitious people who hoped that the master-disciple pair would continue to confront each other, and even hoped to gain some benefits from it, were also shocked. Because the attitude displayed by the Orthodox Academy was far too resolute. This could be accused of not knowing how to respect one's teacher. More seriously, one could even be accused of deceiving one's teacher and destroying one's ancestors. But who was Tang 36? In the several months that he had spent in the ancestral hall, he had earnestly made a sinister and cold-blooded plan to overthrow the entire Tang clan. He didn't care about that at all. As for whether he could make a decision for the Tradition Academy, whether he could make a decision for Chen Chongqing, that was another question. More people thought that this was originally Chen Chongqing's intention. Chen Chongqing did not know that after he left the Orthodox Academy, Tang 36 would say these words. He also had no intention of doing so, because he had never imagined just how much the Orthodox Academy's ownership of him or his teacher would affect the current situation. But after learning of this matter, he was not shocked, and he certainly did not object. He and Tang 36 had never spoken before, but in the past few years, by the lake and on the great banyan tree, they had spoken far too many times, discussed far too many futures, and in those future scenes, the Orthodox Academy would always be there. And he knew that Tang 36 was helping him make a choice. Su Yu-rong killing Bishop Mei Chuan in the Orthodox Academy was also helping him make a choice. Making a choice was the most difficult and sometimes the most painful thing in the world. Su Yu-rong and Tang 36 were the people closest to him under the starry sky. They knew what he was thinking and wanted to share this pain with him. But when he thought of Mou's words last night, Chen Chongqing was moved and also somewhat melancholy. Melancholy often affected one's appetite. The food on the plate looked and smelled delicious, but it seemed tasteless. He put down his chopsticks. Is the flower kiss mushroom not delicious? A beautiful woman looked at him and asked nervously, There is a bowl of green jade meatball soup in the kitchen, do you want to try it? Shui Yijin's expression was also a bit nervous. That woman was Shui Xingchuan's eldest daughter and also Shui Yijin's older sister. After Shui Xingchuan died, she was beaten by her husband, Assistant Minister Wei, who was greedy for wealth, and then divorced and returned to the Shui mansion. Then, on the day when the wind and snow covered the street, Assistant Minister Wei's head was cut off by Wang Pu and Chen Chongqing. She had been living in the Shui mansion for the past few years, and her original delicacy was long gone. It could be seen from the clothes she wore and the thin calluses on her fingers. This kind of change, in the eyes of some people, might cause a lot of emotions and sadness, but it made Chen Chongqing a bit happy. He liked people who lived their lives seriously. He liked people who would not be melancholy no matter what situation they were in. It's delicious, he said seriously. The soup is also very good, but there are a lot of things to do today, so I get distracted. Hearing this, Lady Shui and Shui Yijin both laughed. Madame Shui did not laugh. She knew of what had happened in the Orthodox Academy, and she also knew that Chen Chongqing would assuredly face many troubles upon his return to the capital. Somewhat uneasily, she said, Sir has no idea how many important matters you have to take care of. There really is no need for you to come see us. This truly makes me feel apologetic. There truly are a lot of matters to take care of. Chen Chongqing glanced at the color of the sky and rose to bid farewell. The three people from the Shui clan did not dare to ask him to stay and hurriedly sent him off. The old steward and a servant woman respectfully waited in front of the estate's gate. These were the only servants of the Shui estate. Together with the three people from the Shui clan, they currently lived in the smallest courtyard on the eastern side of the Shui estate. The imperial court had never issued a decree to reclaim the Shui clan's estate, but several princes had always been watching. Chen Chongqing gazed at the tensome princely estates lining the street and thought of these matters. Night gradually approached, but for some reason, those princely estates were still open. Light spilled out from within, falling on the dancing snow like golden sparks. It was a beautiful sight. Chen Chongqing walked into the snowstorm. He had heard Zhixiu and Mou say that Zhou Tong had crawled through this place. On that night, no matter how Zhou Tong wailed and begged, no one from the princely estates came to save him. Even though he was no longer the Tianhai Divine Empress's dog, but Shang Xingzhou's dog. By now, the entire capital probably knew that he had entered the Shui estate, and those princes naturally knew as well. Would those princes do something? No one came out, nor did they make a sound. The snowstorm on the street was incomparably quiet, all peaceful. Past the brightly lit princely estates was a common street. The two sides of the street were packed with people, a dense mass of people. The people of the capital were all believers of the orthodoxy. Upon seeing his figure, they hurriedly prostrated like a tide. There were no priests at his side, no papal cavalry, no attendants, no divine carriage. He walked forward alone. Wherever he went, the people there would kneel and devoutly pray and bless him. The black tide continued to beat towards the front of the street until the famous stone pillars were submerged. Chen Chongqing stood in front of the stone pillars, gazing at those majestic, divine, and dignified palaces, thinking about something. A bell suddenly tolled from deep within the palace, because the Pope had returned. To be continued. Chapter 13. Past the stone pillars was the divine path leading into the depths of the Li Palace. The teachers and students of the Li Palace Academy, the Temple Seminary, and the 13 divisions of radiant green stood on both sides of the divine path, bowing in respect. A few stories had taken place on this divine path, but Chen Chongqing did not recall them and continued forward. He ascended the long steps, walked past the Hall of Pure Virtue, and finally arrived at that quiet hall. The night sky had been divided into a well by the eaves, just as it had been in the past, but the wooden ladle by the pool was no longer there, as the green leaf was no longer there. And Hua kneeled, her white ceremonial robes fluttering in the chilly wind, just like her excited mood. Chen Chongqing nodded in greeting and had her rise. And Hua walked behind him and helped him put on his divine robe, then carefully tidied it up for a very long time. Chen Chongqing gazed up at the somewhat narrow night sky, at the many stars at the bottom of the well, and recalled the comprehension he had gained while gazing at the sea of stars in White Emperor City. After some time, he drew back his gaze and said, "Let's go." With the clear and gentle sound of water washing his heart, he walked to the deepest part of the quiet hall, in front of that stone wall. The stone wall slowly parted, countless blazing rays of light rushing out, accompanied by the endless roar of waves. These waves were the sounds of clothes rubbing against each other as people prostrating, but they were also the excited or reverent words of praise. Paying respects to His Holiness the Pope. Countless priests prostrated on the ground like a tide. Chen Chongqing wore the sacred crown and gripped the divine staff as he gazed at this sight, his expression very calm. Starting from the small village of Mount Han, this sort of sight had appeared more and more often. Just like the most common description, like a tide. None of this was new to him. He was used to seeing crowds and seas of people. This was also not the first time he had stood here. He stood on the platform of the Great Hall of Light. This was not the highest place in the Li Palace, but it was assuredly the highest place in the entire continent. This place was only 10 some stone steps from the ground, but it felt like it was separated by tens of thousands of li. He had already arrived in the divine kingdom of the Sea of Stars. The pious praises of the divine and the chanting of scriptures began once more. A solemn and divine atmosphere enveloped the entire great hall of light. The warm, sacred light illuminated everything in the hall. Not even the slightest darkness could exist here. There was an extremely tall stone wall in the Light Palace. The sages, heroes, knights, and saints of the previous generation were engraved on it. They were illuminated by the holy light and looked as if they were coming to life. The sages, heroes, knights, and saints of the previous generation looked down on the world from above. Their gazes were not indifferent, but filled with many real emotions. Chen Chongqing stood in front of the stone wall, within the holy light. He endured those gazes. He was looking at the world. This scene was incomparably sacred. Chen Chongqing lifted the divine staff in his hand. The chanting gradually stopped, and the priests slowly got up, still like the tide. The light palace suddenly became extremely quiet. It was as if the sound of the wind that had luckily passed through the formation and brushed against the stone walls could be clearly heard by everyone. Perhaps it was because before the divine staff fell, the sea of people in the hall had already been divided into two sides. Linghai Jiwang, Archbishop and Lin, Daoist Siuan, and Hu 32, 4 prefects of the Orthodoxy, stood on the right. Several hundred bishops of the Li Palace, and those who had hurried back from the various Daoist churches, stood behind them. There were far fewer bishops on the other side. There was not a single Sacred Hall archbishop, but there were many cardinals. These bishops all had one thing in common, and that was that they all looked a little old. No matter where one was, the age and experience represented by this sort of age was a sort of power in itself. The bishops of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education were also here. More importantly, the Heavenly Tao Academy, the 13 divisions of Radiant Green, and the Temple Seminary were also here. Only the Li Palace Academy, which had been greatly influenced by Linghai Jiwang, was not here. That principal and Su Moyu stood in the crowd, intentionally maintaining a low profile. Zhuang Jihuan and the 3 bishops of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education stood at the very front of the crowd, making no attempt to hide their tracks or thoughts. Chen Changxing glanced at Zhuang Jihuan, then turned to a certain corner outside the hall. The holy light shrouded the entire hall, some of it also spilling outside. A hole was torn in the deep darkness outside the hall, illuminating a certain corner. Bishop Mei Chuan was there. No matter how warm the holy light was, it could not drive away the chill on his body. Because he was already dead. Back when Chen Changxing had just become pope, he had been expelled from the capital by Shang Xingzhou. He was an exiled pope. 3 years later, he returned to the Li Palace. This was his first time presiding over the Assembly of Light as pope, and he had to confront an extremely thorny problem. The priests of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education, Zhuang Jihuan, and the elderly cardinals were all looking at him. In the eyes of these bishops of the conservative faction, one could clearly see grief and indignation. Of course, they still maintained a sufficient amount of respect for Chen Changxing and still controlled their emotions extremely well. Otherwise, Mei Chuan's body would not have been in that corner outside the hall, but within the great hall of light, placed right in front of them. Linghai Jiwang expressionlessly looked in that direction, his eyes extremely cold and his complexion extremely unsightly. After learning of what had happened in the Orthodox Academy, he had been keeping a close eye on the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education and these elderly priests. He had not expected that they would still transport Mei Chuan's body into the Li Palace and place it outside the Great Hall of Light. He believed this to be a naked provocation, and of course it was also a warning to him. This meant that the Li Palace was not a monolithic block. The strength of the Orthodoxy's conservative faction still could not be underestimated. There might be some people secretly supporting them. Linghai Jiwang slightly narrowed his eyes, his gaze moving back and forth between Hu 32 and Archbishop and Lin as he thought, just who is that person? Tonight was the Pope's first Assembly of Light. For such a thing to happen was a great disrespect that he could not tolerate. But he knew that it was inconvenient for him to do anything, and he certainly could not have people carry Mei Chuan's body away. There were far too many people who had seen this sight. A method that was too crude might cause some priests to lose control of their emotions. Of course, he was confident that the Pope's prestige and his own status could forcefully suppress the current situation. The problem was that the crack would not disappear. On the contrary, it would only deepen. It was obvious that this was not what the Pope wanted. Linghai Jiwang looked at Chen Changxing, suddenly rather expectant. Many of the bishops in the hall were seeing Chen Changxing for the first time, so they had no opinion on the conflict between the new and the conservative. Most of them were curious, or perhaps expectant. How would the Pope resolve this matter? Yes, the one who killed Mei Chuan was the Holy Maiden, and Prince Chen Lu had been the witness for the entire process. Everyone knew of the relationship between the Holy Maiden and the Pope. She had helped the Pope make his choice, so she had naturally prepared a reason for it. Logically speaking, Chen Chongqing only needed to state that reason and this matter would be resolved. But for some reason, all the priests, including Ling Haijiwang, and even the priests of the conservative faction, did not believe that he would do this. There was no reason. Perhaps it was because the stories of the past few years had long since proved that he would not do this. To be continued. Chapter 14. Everyone hoped that Chen Chongqing could give a perfect solution, including the most stubborn bishops of the conservative faction. Those elderly bishops looked at Chen Chongqing with rather complicated gazes. He was Shang Xingzhou's student, a young man raised by Mei Lisha. He was indisputably of Xining's lineage, a legitimate successor of the orthodoxy. Logically speaking, he should have stood on their side, but he did not. He had placed great importance on Ling Haijiwang and Daoist Siyuan, and after executing Daoist Baisher in Wenshui City, he had not thought to appease the conservative faction. Instead, he had Hu 32, the bishop of the new faction with the worst of reputations, take Daoist Baisher's place. It was precisely these matters that caused the conservative faction of the orthodoxy to feel intense dissatisfaction, resulting in the current situation. But even now, no one had thought or dared to push him down from the position of pope. They still held hope in Chen Chongqing. But not even they knew what they hoped Chen Chongqing would do. Mei Chuan's corpse was still in the darkness outside the hall. This was Su Yorong's choice. Chen Chongqing could have gone with the flow, but he would not do this. Because the Taoist techniques he had cultivated since childhood made it impossible for him to deceive himself or others. Even though this was a necessary quality for one to accomplish great things. He suddenly recalled Bi Yanghong's words in White Emperor City. There was naturally an enormous difference between the two, but an analogy could be made. He also recalled the words Archbishop Mei Lisha had said to him before his death many years ago. When I was walking along the Divine Avenue, I recalled what happened that year before the grand examination. A nostalgic smile appeared on Chen Chongqing's face. Everyone knew that he was speaking of Archbishop Mei Lisha's announcement to the entire continent that he wanted to take first place of the first banner in the grand examination. The memories could not continue, and the atmosphere that could have been moving toward warmth once more became tense, because a cold and harsh voice rose from the crowd. In the end, Sir killed his only nephew. The hall became abnormally quiet. Chen Chongqing said nothing. Yes, someone had sent Mei Chuan to the Orthodox Academy to become an education overseer precisely to make things difficult for him. Whether to kill or not to kill, it was difficult. So Tang 36 immediately turned and went to the house, prepared to take his sword and kill Mei Chuan. So Su Yorong killed Mei Chuan. They were all the people closest to him, and they understood his thoughts and feelings the best. That was why they didn't let him choose and didn't let him bear the burden of infamy. However, he did not stop Tang 36 at that time, so this was also his choice. Above the sea of stars was the divine kingdom. Everything under the dirt returns to dust. I will bear all the crimes I deserve. Chen Chongqing looked at the crowd and said calmly. He did not use warm memories to heal the rift between the old and the new factions, nor did he give a convincing reason. There was no explanation and naturally no solution. He chose to bear it calmly. The Light Palace was in an uproar, exclamations constantly sounding. The expressions of the priests kept changing. They were extremely complicated. Some were disappointed, some were gratified, some were confused, and some were confused. Chen Chongqing was willing to bear all the charges. The problem was, just who under the starry sky could convict the Pope? This was not the introspection of a saint, but the coldest declaration. A few disappointed sighs rang out from the crowd, as well as questions. Chen Chongqing held onto the divine staff and quietly stood in place, not saying a word. Linghai Jiwang walked to the front of the platform, took out the file he had prepared, unfurled it with both hands, and began to read. As he announced one name after another in an extremely cold voice, the clamor in the main hall gradually died down and became quiet. The only sounds left were the increasingly heavy breathing and the increasingly dense footstep. Those pale-faced and repulsive black deacons of the Hall of Heavenly Judgment brought out tensome bishops from the crowd. One of the 3 cardinals in charge of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education had been removed from his post on the spot. Linghai Jiwang's voice was still devoid of emotion, as clear as the sharpest knife. He read out the crimes of this cardinal. These crimes had nothing to do with tonight, but they were clear and conclusive. The cardinal did not resist, calmly following the black deacons out of the hall. Zhuang Jihuan and the others subtly paled as they gazed at his somewhat desolate back. The mood in the hall grew more and more oppressive. Finally, a gap was torn open. A bishop who had already been dragged to the door struggled to turn around and harshly yelled at the platform, "Does His Holiness intend to be a cruel sovereign?" The crowd could tell that this bishop was the one who had questioned Chen Chongqing at the very beginning. Chen Chongqing did not answer. Gripping the divine staff, he quietly stood on the platform. Zhuang Jihuan finally stood out. After calmly bowing, he asked, "Should we wait for Archbishop to break out of seclusion before making a final decision?" Countless gazes fell on him. Everyone understood what he meant. The Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education was now under the direct jurisdiction of Mao Chuyu. Mao Chuyu was about to become the orthodoxy's sole expert of the divine domain. Zhuang Jihuan's words were a warning, and could even be understood as a threat. Linghai Jiwang expressionlessly glanced at him. He said nothing, but an undisguised killing intent appeared in his cold eyes. Zhuang Jihuan's expression did not change as he continued to stare at Chen Chongqing. At this moment, an unexpected person stood out. Archbishop Enlin solemnly said, "The sea of stars of the saint is like facing the abyss," from the final section of the essay on the origin of the Tao. Chen Chongqing didn't let her finish her sentence. He turned to her and said, "This section of the Taoist canon speaks of reverence." Archbishop Enlin bowed and replied, "Yes." Chen Chongqing said to her, "In this aspect, I am better than you." Enlin's expression froze, and then she saw several figures in the darkness outside the hall. Tonight, Mei Chuan's body had been transported into the Li Palace precisely because he had received the assistance of these people. Just what was reverence? The sea of stars? The great Tao? Or the lives of one's relatives or subordinates? She fell silent for a very long time, then sighed, "How did my holiness know?" Chen Chongqing did not answer this question. Earlier, behind the stone wall, when Anhua was helping him tidy up his clothes, she had said a few words in a trembling voice. Archbishop Enlin gave up on her questioning. Her voice somewhat hoarse, she asked, "How has my holiness decided to deal with me?" Chen Chongqing replied, "I said before, I am willing to bear all the crimes." Archbishop Enlin sighed, "I understand. I will abdicate the position of Sacred Hall Archbishop." She had no intention of betraying the Pope. Today was the first time she had accepted the advice of the conservative faction and helped them with a few things, because she wanted to see just how the Pope was prepared to deal with this matter. Now that she saw the result, she felt somewhat sorrowful and somewhat disappointed. It was not because she had been exposed and lost her position as a prefect of the orthodoxy, but because Chen Chongqing had handled this matter too forcefully, too callously. She softly asked, "Is this the heartlessness of the saint?" "No, some people want me to become ambitious and ruthless, some want me to become a hero, some want me to become a sage, and some want me to become a saint." Chen Chongqing fell quiet for a while, then continued, "But in truth, I am still that young Taoist that entered the capital to participate in the grand examination." Archbishop Enlin seriously asked, This being the case, why go through all this trouble? Chen Chongqing slightly creased his brow, his breathing ragged. Only those closest to him could tell that he was in an extremely bad mood. Have none of you ever thought of a problem? It was never me who wanted to be Pope. I don't know whose damned idea it was. Perhaps it was Marshal Uncle's, perhaps it was Archbishop May's, perhaps it was Master's? It was them who wanted me to be Pope. Before this, they never asked if I was willing. So the things I did were all things they hoped I would do. Chapter 15. The lanterns in the orange garden were warmer than those in other parts of the capital. Perhaps it was because all the lanterns were covered with orange peels. Su Yorong stood in front of the window, her hands clasped behind her back, as she looked at the orange lanterns in the garden. No one knew what she was thinking. As she watched her back, Mou suddenly thought of the Divine Empress. In those years, the Divine Empress liked to stand on the dew platform and look down on the capital, and she also liked to hold her hands behind her back. Mou felt very uneasy. Would another Divine Empress appear in this world? She asked. Why do you want to see Prince Qinlu? What do you want to do? Without turning around, Su Yorong said, just reminiscing about the past. Mou's voice was slightly cold as she said, must you go to the Orthodox Academy to reminisce? Why did you kill Mei Chuan then? With Tang 36's style, do you think he would let Mei Chuan live? Su Yorong replied, I'm not a person of the Orthodox Academy, nor am I a person of the Li Palace. It's more suitable for me to act. Mou said, your actions can be understood as your deep affection for Chen Chongqing and your desire to resolve his troubles for him. It can also be understood as your desire to intensify the conflict between the new and conservative factions of the Orthodoxy, leaving no room for reconciliation between him and the venerable Taoist. The question is, what exactly are you thinking? Su Yorong turned around to look at her and calmly said, you told Chen Chongqing that you were worried that I would avenge the Empress. Mou said, I don't believe that you would forget, even though you denied it to him. Su Yorong smiled and said, since that's the case, isn't what I should do? Mou was slightly annoyed and said, but you should understand that this will bring a lot of trouble to Chen Chongqing. The Education Board doesn't have the right to demand an explanation from you, but they can demand an explanation from Chen Chongqing. Su Yorong said, this is very easy to solve. Yes, the word disrespectful is enough, because only you and Prince Chen Lu are present. Mou looked at her and sneered, but you know Chen Chongqing. You know that with his personality, he wouldn't do such a thing. So what should we do? In the end, he will be forced to become the kind of person he doesn't want to be. Su Yorong replied, he should learn to do this if he wants to become Pope. Mou asked, what if he simply doesn't want to be Pope? Su Yorong was quiet for a while, then said, then I'll be the Holy Maiden. News of what had happened in the Li Palace quickly spread to every corner of the capital. The purge of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education was within the expectations of many people, but it was still a bit surprising that it happened so quickly. What was even more shocking was that Archbishop Enlin had lost her power. Back when Taoist Baisher was killed in Wenshui City, many people had been shocked speechless. It was just that there were other secrets at the time, so both the imperial court and the priests of the Li Palace had maintained their silence. Tonight's events, however, had been witnessed by many people. Everyone thought that Chen Chongqing's return to the capital was the first bolt of lightning. They couldn't help but sigh in awe. As expected of the successor appointed by the previous pope, as expected of the venerable Tao Master's student, facing Chen Chongqing's purge, neither the Education Board nor Archbishop Enlin put up any resistance. Beneath the calm surface of the situation, who knew how many unimaginable methods were hidden? Just when everyone thought that the curtain would fall on tonight's great show, another clap of thunder exploded in the night sky over the capital. That was the last sentence Chen Chongqing said. Stop here? What did that mean? Did he mean that his purge of the orthodoxy's conservative faction would end here? Did he mean that Shang Xingzhou and the imperial court's probing of the Li Palace would have to end here? Or was he talking about the position of Pope? Rumors spread like the wind, and with the addition of several bolts of lightning, they quickly dispersed the snowy clouds over the capital. The vast sky of stars calmly watched over the mortal world, and the mortal world was also filled with stars. Several thousand of the most devout believers of the orthodoxy walked out of their homes, came to the Li Palace, and kneeled on the bone-chilling ground. They held candlelight in their hands. It seemed weak, but when several thousand were gathered together, it was extremely bright. And Hua knelt at the very front, her face even paler than her ceremonial robes, and one could faintly see traces of tears on her face. As the number of believers increased, so did the candlelight, until it became a sea of light. There were no bitter pleas, but the mood was gloomy, and one could occasionally hear weeping. When Mei Chuan died in the Orthodox Academy, the capital was abuzz with discussion. These discussions were naturally very unfavorable to Chen Chongqing. Tonight, as the lightning bolts and the sea of light in front of the Li Palace shook the entire capital, public opinion rapidly changing. The populace had long ago forgotten what they had said at dinner. They angrily stared at the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education behind the maple forest, the princely estates on the Road of Peace, and even the imperial palace. These flames of anger that had not yet broken through the earth caused the important personages living in those places to become extremely vigilant and angry. They urgently wanted to know just what had happened in the Li Palace, wanted to grasp all the details. The spies in the Li Palace and the several star condensation painters of the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets, now under the control of the imperial court, played an extremely important role. In the great hall brimming with sacred light, Chen Chongqing stood at the highest point and said those words, the meaning of which was so clear. Flipping the table and refusing to do anything? Who can this threaten? A hint of derision appeared on Tian Haichenwu's face. Do they really think that they can rely on those mediocre people to make the venerable Taoist yield? This move of retreating to advance is very shrewd and ruthless. The Prince of Xiang rubbed the fat on his belly, his face fraught with worry. The imperial court can't just tear down this memorial arch, right? Towards Chen Chongqing's words, different people had different interpretations. To the common people, this was the saint being somewhat disheartened by the perilous situation of the times. To the important personages, this was just a method he was using to resist Shang Xingzhou and the conservative faction. And whether they responded with derision or headaches, the important personages all felt that this method was very formidable. Only Su Yorong and Tang 36 knew that this was not a method. Because when Chen Chongqing said those words, he really had been thinking this. Su Yorong said, "Doing these things goes against your heart and conflicts with your Tao. It truly is rather exhausting." Chen Chongqing replied, "I'm not even willing to do these things myself, so how can I watch as the rest of you do them for me?" Su Yorong calmly replied, "Perhaps we are people who like to do these things?" Chen Chongqing replied, "No one is born with the desire to kill, to struggle for power, to scheme against each other." Su Yorong indifferently replied, "When I was born, I also didn't like playing mahjong, but that was because I didn't know how to." Chen Chongqing was quiet for a while, then asked, "Are you very disappointed in me?" "Of course not, because only those who don't want to be pope can be good pope." Su Yorong continued, "Just like your senior brother. He didn't want to be emperor, so he became a good emperor." Tang 36's flustered and exasperated voice came from outside the hall. "I'll leave first," she said to Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing replied, "Senior is a very approachable person." Su Yorong replied, "But I'm not." Chen Chongqing froze. Su Yorong turned and walked out of the Li Palace. After a while, she arrived in front of the imperial city. She wanted to see the emperor. To be continued. Chapter 16. Tang 36 walked into the hall and yelled at Chen Chongqing, "What does that sentence mean?" Chen Chongqing said, "It means exactly what it says." Tang 36 froze and asked, "Why?" Chen Chongqing said, "I suddenly thought that his way of thinking might be correct." Tang 36 waved his hand and said, "In the past, we discussed this by the lake. Being young is correct." Chen Chongqing said seriously, "This sentence itself is not correct." Tang 36 said angrily, "Are you saying that sentence of yours is correct?" Chen Chongqing was quiet for a while, then said, "I was a little angry at the time." Tang 36 said, "So you said those words out of anger?" Chen Chongqing replied, "You can say that." Tang 36 said, "Since they were words out of anger, they naturally don't count." Chen Chongqing very seriously asked for guidance, "Why?" Tang 36 said, "You and I are people. People's anger is a fart, and words spoken out of anger are farts. How can farts be taken seriously?" Chen Chongqing said, "Farts have a smell, but air doesn't necessarily have a smell." Tang 36 said, "Whether it has a smell or not, it definitely won't have the unpleasant smell of old people on their bodies." Chen Chongqing remembered that Su Li had said something similar to him in the past. "I have to think of a way to get those believers outside the Li Palace to rise up." He stopped thinking about these problems and said to Tang 36, "Do you have any good ideas?" Tang 36 said unhappily, "You were the one who tied the bell, so why do I have to think?" Chen Chongqing said, "I'm not good at these things." Tang 36 looked around and asked, "Where's Su Yurong?" Chen Chongqing said, "She went to the Imperial Palace." Tang 36's expression changed slightly at these words. Chen Chongqing asked, "What's wrong?" "She just returned to the capital yesterday. Today, she first saw Prince Chen Lu and then Mou, and now she's going to see His Majesty." Tang 36 said, "Why did she see so many people? Don't you find it strange?" The Emperor of the Great Zhou was very young and very low-key. He was extremely inconspicuous, and was even often forgotten by the common people. Up until now, his existence was like a fog to the people of the Zhou dynasty. Not many people knew that his name was Chen Yuan. At present, Shang Xingzhou very rarely expressed his opinions on the important matters of the state. He even spent the majority of his time not in the capital, but in the Monastery of Eternal Spring in Luoyang. Everyone knew that he was making preparations for his return to government. Of course, the prerequisite was that he had to resolve the problem of the orthodoxy, but as long as that day had not yet arrived, he was still the most powerful person in the Great Zhou. As for the important affairs of the imperial court, they were also controlled by the princes of the Chen clan, the Tianhai clan, and other nobles. The only thing the young emperor did was to review the memorials sent into the palace by the various prefectures. He also rarely summoned officials to the palace. Even Mou, whom he had personally summoned back to Jingdou, had only entered the palace 3 times. Many people thought that this was because His Majesty was cold and eccentric, unwilling to meet people. Why? Because he was handicapped. He could not speak, he could not see with one eye, he was missing an ear, he was lame in one leg, and he had a broken hand. With such a heavy handicap, it would not be an exaggeration to call him a cripple. But this cripple had become the emperor of the Great Zhou. Because of Shang Xingzhou, no one dared to stand up and say anything, much less express their opposition. But their thoughts could not be changed. Ever since Yuren ascended to the throne, countless rumors and slanders had spread within and without the palace. Some said that he had a cruel and tyrannical personality, that he delighted in beating palace maids to death. Some said that he had a timid and introverted personality, that he spent every day in the palace being ridden by palace maids. But these people had forgotten a very important matter. The young emperor only reviewed memorials and resided deep in the palace. But in the 3 years since he ascended to the throne, he had swiftly stabilized the chaotic situation in the Tianhai dynasty. The decrees of the imperial court were unimpeded, Politics grew clearer by the day, the situation stabilized. Harsh laws were abolished while lax laws continued to be enforced, and the lives of the people grew better and better. The current Great Zhou could truly be described as a calm sea and clear river. How could such an emperor be a tyrannical and incapable ruler, and how could he be a timid and mediocre person? Many important figures, including the White Emperor, were well aware that this emperor's ability to govern and wisdom was absolutely extraordinary. Yes, how could the only son of Emperor Xian and the Tianhai Divine Empress, the person Shang Xingzhou had placed all of his dreams on, be an ordinary person? Su Yorong naturally did not believe that the young emperor was as the rumors described him to be. She was also very curious as to what sort of person he was. Before the young emperor returned to the capital and ascended to the throne, she had heard his name many times. In those conversations, the young emperor was addressed as senior brother or senior Yuren. In the snowy temple and mausoleum in the garden of Zhou, Chen Chongqing had mentioned his senior brother many times. At the time, Chen Chongqing still did not know that she was Su Yorong, so he was naturally hiding something or concealing something. In those conversations, she could hear absolute closeness and trust. Even though it had been many years since he had left Xining village, 3 years since he had left the capital, Chen Chongqing's trust in his senior brother remained unchanged. Even though other than that night in the Mausoleum of Books, these two brothers had never met again. The question was, could people really not change? Su Yorong did not believe it, especially since she was keenly aware of the power of that chair. It was precisely the chair that Yu Ren was currently sitting on. For the sake of that chair, Emperor Taizong had become callous and cruel, killing his brother and forcing his father. The Divine Empress was the same. The young emperor was a descendant of the Qin clan, the Divine Empress's own son, so how could he be someone who believed in emotions? Su Yorong felt somewhat uneasy. Many of the things she wanted to do were founded on Chen Chongqing's trust in Yu Ren. So she wanted to see for herself what sort of person this young emperor was. The eunuchs and maids escorted her to the door, then bowed and withdrew. Su Yorong noticed that those eunuchs and maids gazed at the light in the depths of the hall with eyes brimming with respect and love. As a child, she had often entered the imperial palace, and there was even a palace here that belonged to her. She was extremely familiar with this place, but she was extremely unfamiliar with this sort of gaze. This sort of gaze should not belong in a place as deep and serene as the imperial palace. The light in the depths of the great hall came from the night pearl embedded in the vermilion pillar. The ancient floorboards had been polished until they shone so brightly that a person's figure could be seen. The young emperor was sitting behind a desk, reading a memorial to the throne. He was dressed in bright yellow clothes, one of his sleeves empty. His hair had been combed neatly, not purposely hanging down to hide that blind eye. Su Yorong walked to the desk. The young emperor raised his head. His expression was very gentle, his eyes very calm, but they gave off an unswerving and clear feeling. Su Yorong found him rather familiar, and then for some reason, she felt a sense of closeness. Was it because he was the Empress's own son? Or was it because his eyes and expression seemed to be carved from the same mold as Chen Chongqing's? Su Yorong had a deep understanding of the Tianhai Divine Empress, and she also had a deep understanding of Chen Chongqing. Without the need for words, she knew what the Divine Empress and Chen Chongqing were thinking. At this moment, she also knew what the young emperor was thinking. Su Yorong asked, "Why doesn't His Majesty like me?" Chapter 17. Many thanks to my book friends for recording the audio recording of Heaven's Choosing Record. I will find some time to seriously listen to it. Recently, I've truly been too busy and can't find the time. I first glanced at the table of contents, then seriously thought about it. Recording this was very time-consuming, very exhausting. Ho, this is too moving. With a glance, Su Yorong could tell that Yuren did not like her. Yuren calmly gazed at her, saying nothing, because he could not speak. Su Yorong self-deprecatingly said, I always thought that everyone liked me. These words were rather cute. Yuren smiled. But the smile in his eyes was rather faint, indifferent. Su Yorong looked into his eyes and suddenly smiled. Because she understood why Yuren did not like her. The events of tonight had probably already reached the palace, so Yuren probably knew that Chen Chongqing was truly angry. In his view, these events had all been caused by Su Yorong. So he did not like her. Upon understanding this reason, Su Yorong realized that there was no need to ask any more questions. Yuren truly valued Chen Chongqing, just like how Chen Chongqing valued him. This pair of martial brothers from Xining village were like a pair of biological brothers, even more so than real brothers. Su Yorong's smile was very beautiful, because she had always been very beautiful. And at this moment, her smile was sincere. Whether it was because of her beautiful face or because he saw her sincerity, the indifference in Yuren's eyes lessened. Yes, he does not like being pope, and in this matter, he has no choice. Su Yorong continued, I am different. When I was 5, the Empress and Master gave me the chance to choose. This was a choice I made, and it has already become my habit, so it is more suitable for me to do what comes next. What came next? The first thing was naturally to continue this conversation. Su Yorong sat down across from the desk, appearing very natural. Yuren used his right hand to push a small plate on the desk over. Su Yorong realized that the plate was filled with sugar-preserved plums. Yuren did not seem like someone who liked to eat sugar-preserved plums, so perhaps this was prepared for those eunuchs and maids? Su Yorong did not think this was a humiliation. On the contrary, she knew that this was Yuren expressing his kindness. Although his method of expressing kindness was the same as Chen Chongqing's, rather clumsy. She picked up a sugar-soaked plum and put it into her mouth with a satisfied expression on her face. Yuren smiled at this sight, feeling very satisfied. Su Yorong said, What I practice is not the orthodox Tao of the orthodoxy. Up until today, I still don't really understand what Chen Chongqing meant by following one's heart. That's why I don't understand the relationship between the two of you. Probably only the 3 of you in the entire continent can understand it. However, the problem still needs to be solved. Yuren calmly gazed at her, using his eyes to ask her for a solution. It's very simple. You two can join hands and ask your master to retire. Su Yorong had a sugared plum in her mouth, so her voice was a little muffled. The meaning she wanted to express was very clear, even as sharp as the temple sword. In the shadows of the hall there was a gasp, as if that person had eaten an extremely sour plum. Su Yorong's expression did not change. It was obvious that she already knew that there was someone there. Yuren gazed at that shadow and shook his head. Eunuch Lin's figure gradually emerged from that shadow, and then he bowed and retreated out of the hall. Perhaps it was because the impact of Su Yorong's words was too great, or perhaps it was because of the passage of time, but the figure of this imperial palace expert was somewhat stooped. When he left, he forgot to bolt the palace door. The slightly chilly winter wind surged in from the deep night. It was blocked by the array attached to the palace and made a rustling sound like paper being thrown. A western window was blown open by the wind and slammed against the wall. Several gusts of wind passed through the array and ruffled the yellow silk within the hall. The night pearls were not candles, but their light seemed to be shaken by those gusts of wind, constantly wavering and unable to clearly illuminate the faces of Su Yorong and Yuren. Their faces were expressionless, their eyes unblinking. They only quietly stared at each other. Su Yorong's eyes were absolutely calm. Yuren was somewhat confused. He could not understand why she would make such a suggestion, or why she dared to make such a suggestion. The entire continent knew that, in stark contrast to his cold and heartless treatment of Chen Chongqing, Shang Xingzhou treated Yuren extremely well. This kindness could even be said to be impeccable. Even Shang Xingzhou's enemies, even Chen Chongqing, had to admit this. Yes, he raised you, educated you, and took good care of you. He sent you to the position of emperor and taught you how to rule the country. Now, he's even prepared to hand over power to you. No matter how you look at it, he seems to treat you very well. But the question is he really good to you? Su Yorong calmly said. He likes Emperor Taizong, not you. You are just a projection of his emotions, a puppet. The breeze rose again. A bright yellow sleeve rustled. Yuren arched his brows. He did not flick his sleeve and leave, did not slam the table and stand up. But Su Yorong knew that he did not want to hear any more. So she changed her words. If that master and disciple really did become enemies, would you just watch as they killed each other? If your master really did kill Chen Chongxing, would he not regret it in the future? Even if it's for the good of your master, you should still do something to prevent all this from happening. Su Yorong said, you should choose where to stand, the earlier the better, and it cannot be in the middle. Yuren shook his head. He did not believe that Su Yorong's words were wrong, nor was he rejecting her proposal. He just wanted to tell her that this was meaningless. Su Yorong's gaze fell on the jade pendant tied to his waist, and she understood his meaning. 3 years ago, in the snowstorm of the capital, when Chen Chongxing wanted to kill Zhou Tong and Shang Xingzhou was preparing to leave the palace, Yuren had appeared in the snow, holding that jade pendant in his hand. This jade pendant had been sent to the palace by the Qiushan clan. It represented the sword that Qiushan Jun had stabbed into his chest during the internal strife of Mount Li. Yuren had used this jade pendant to express his resolve and prevent Shang Xingzhou from leaving the palace. But at the time, Shang Xingzhou had also said to him that this would be the last time. Yuren understood his master. Since he had said it would be the last time, it was assuredly the last time. He did not believe that he and his junior brother working together could make his master back down. Su Yorong suddenly asked, after the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, you and Chen Chongxing never met again. Even though we were both in the capital, even separated by only a palace wall. Why is this? Yuren gazed at the western window blown open by the wind, a look of longing on his face. Over there was the Orthodox Academy. Su Yorong continued, because the two of you know that your master does not wish for the two of you to meet. Yuren said nothing. He and Chen Chongxing both knew that this was what their master was most wary of. Thus, he and Chen Chongxing had never thought of meeting, even if they very much wanted to. Su Yorong continued, but have the two of you ever wondered why he does not wish for the two of you to meet? Yuren was somewhat confused, thinking, isn't it because of those reasons that everyone knows? Su Yorong faintly smiled. Because he is afraid of the two of you. Chapter 18. Why did Shang Xingzhou feel so apprehensive when Chen Chongxing and Yuren met? Conversely, perhaps what Shang Xingzhou feared the most was his two students working together. From this perspective, Su Yorong's words were perhaps the most important secret of the world. The hall was very quiet. The brush quietly rested on the edge of the inkstone, like a wooden oar on a boat docked at the shore. Yuren used his hand to grab a piece of wet white cotton cloth and slightly loosened it a few times to wash his hand. He did not respond to Su Yorong's proposal, but gripped the brush once more. The tip of the brush lightly swept across the sea of ink, stirring up slightly heaving black waves. Then it rose into the air, broke through the clouds, and fell, leaving behind a clear ink mark on the snow-white paper. After writing this line, Yuren put down the brush and used his thumb and forefinger to turn the paper around, aiming it at Su Yorong. What sort of person is she? The she in this sentence naturally referred to the Tianhai Divine Empress. After entering the imperial palace, Su Yorong had not brought up any topic related to the Divine Empress. She could have made a big fuss about this relationship and said, whether your majesty admits it or not, the Divine Empress is still your mother. She could have engaged in a discussion with Yuren about the debt of birth and the debt of upbringing. Or perhaps she could have used a sobbing tone to mention her past in the imperial palace, and thus very naturally speak of the many marks the Divine Empress had left behind. But she did none of these things, because she was not sure what Yuren truly thought of the Divine Empress, what his feelings were. Moreover, Yuren was Chen Chongqing's most beloved senior brother. She did not wish to use this sort of heart-wrenching and excessively cruel method. Upon seeing the words on the paper, she confirmed that she had not made a mistake, and then felt somewhat moved and gratified, her eyelashes slightly trembling. She very quickly regained her composure. Smiling at Yuren, she said, "This is truly the question I am best at answering." No one understood the Tianhai Divine Empress more than Su Yorong. The Princess of Ping was only her daughter in name, Prince Chen Lu was only the Divine Empress's spiritual sustenance, her self-consolation. In the end, Mo Yu and Zhou Tong were her subordinate. Only the Tianhai Divine Empress and her were in reality teacher and disciple, a spiritual and spiritual inheritance, mother and daughter. Now that the Tianhai Divine Empress's soul had returned to the Sea of Stars, only Su Yorong truly understood her thoughts and goals. She felt that reading books had a responsibility to let Yuren and the world know just what sort of person the Tianhai Divine Empress was. Her ladyship is the most broad-minded. The sun, the moon, the mountains, the rivers, the earth, the oceans, all the way to the Sea of Stars. This was Su Yorong's opening speech. Yuren thought for a while, then slowly turned his palm over. With a flip of the hand, he could summon clouds, and with a flip of the hand, he could summon rain. Su Yorong understood his meaning and said, "If he's not an ordinary person, he naturally can't be judged by ordinary things." Yuren once more gazed out the western window into the distance, at the Orthodox Academy shrouded in darkness. The path is the eye, how can virtue exist? This is about morality. Su Yorong said indifferently, "It's a common thing and a small matter." Yuren was somewhat surprised by this answer. Arching his brows, he lightly tapped the edge of the bowl with his finger, producing a clear sound. In the bowl were sugared plums. Yuren's action was rather obscure and difficult to understand. Anyone else would have found it very difficult to guess his intentions, but perhaps because she had been with Chen Chongqing for a long time, Su Yorong quickly understood what he wanted to ask. "If not for Chen Chongqing, would you have also become that sort of person?" "Perhaps I would have become that sort of person. After all, I was taught by the Empress." Su Yorong pondered this question, then continued, "But no one knows the true answer, because he has already appeared." As she said this, she maintained her smile. She seemed very calm, but there was a tinge of shyness, especially towards the latter half of her words. Yuren faintly smiled, somewhat gratified. Today was the second day after the Orthodoxy's diplomatic mission returned to the capital. In this short day, Su Yorong had met with several very important figures. Deep in the night, she had gone to the imperial palace to meet with the young emperor. By the time this conversation was getting to the main topic, the first person she had met during the day was already several hundred li away. 8 dragon horses of the best breed were tiredly lowering their heads, the clear water and bean cakes before them completely incapable of arousing their interest. Bean-sized beads of sweat constantly seeped out from their oily skin and fell to the ground, where they were quickly blown into shards of ice by the cold winds of the street. Logically speaking, Luoyang should have been warmer than the capital, but for some reason, Luoyang was strangely cold this year. Prince Chen Lu gazed at the dark streets and thought of that great battle of Taoist techniques that had taken place here 3 years ago. He felt rather strange. After meeting with Su Yorong in the Orthodox Academy, he had left the capital and come to Luoyang. Only when he entered the most prosperous and famous city of the Great Zhou did he suddenly feel that he had come a little too quickly. An attendant offered him a hot towel, but Prince Chen Lu ignored it, only silently gazing at the Taoist temple before him. This Taoist temple was the famous monastery of Eternal Spring. A blue-clothed Taoist walked out, thanked him for his troubles, and then led him into the Taoist temple. Prince Chen Lu dispelled these thoughts and steadily walked forward. Su Yorong had probably already entered the imperial palace, and that person in the Taoist temple probably already knew. To him, this was a very good opportunity, a very good entry point. Arriving at a seemingly simple scripture room deep within the monastery of Eternal Spring, the blue-clothed Taoist silently withdrew, leaving him alone. Prince Chen Lu took in a deep breath, calmed himself, and then pushed open the tightly shut wooden door of the scripture room. Shang Xingzhou was in the room organizing medical records, his expression extremely focused. This most powerful expert of the human race, at this time, looked like the most ordinary, but definitely the most fanatical doctor. Prince Chen Lu walked up to the table and borrowed the light of the night pearls to clearly see the names of several medicinal ingredients on the paper. His eyes slightly focused as he thought, if I'm not wrong and I remember correctly, based on the Tang clan's analysis, these ingredients should be used to refine the cinnabar pill. Is the imperial court prepared to use this method to weaken Chen Chongqing's reputation? Shang Xingzhou gave him no explanation. He quietly and attentively wrote his medical records, even acting like he did not know that he had come. Prince Chen Lu knew that he did not have much time, so he did not hesitate or pause, saying what he wanted to say. He had traveled through the night for several hundred years, from the capital to Chang'an, precisely to say those words to Shang Xingzhou, even though it was only a few words. His Majesty is the Divine Empress's own son. Prince Chen Lu looked at Shang Xingzhou and said, and I am also a descendant of Emperor Taizong. Hearing this, Shang Xingzhou's gaze finally left the table and fell on his face. Shang Xingzhou did not hide his admiration, though he admired Prince Chen Lu's attitude even more. Su Yorong entered the imperial palace, probably to prepare an alliance with His Majesty. Prince Chen Lu said, it's obvious that she's going crazy. To be continued. Chapter 19. Shang Xingzhou said nothing. He stood up and walked out of the room. Prince Chen Lu froze for a moment and then hurriedly followed. Shang Xingzhou walked up the stone steps to the roof. It seemed to be a stargazing platform. The chilly wind ruffled his sleeves. Prince Chen Lu finally noticed that this Taoist monastery had no array to protect against heat or cold. Shang Xingzhou raised his head to the starry sky. He did not hold his hands behind him, his blue sleeves swaying in the wind. He looked like a clown on a stage. It seemed like in the next moment, he would slightly crouch down and then charge forward, or perhaps jump into the starry sky, and then laughably fall back down. Prince Chen Lu gazed at his back and subconsciously compared him to the Divine Empress on the dew platform. In order to destroy a person, one must first make them crazy. Shang Xingzhou's voice was very light like the wind. It had no flavor, no emphasis, and it was impossible to sense his true emotions. Prince Chen Lu did not know where these words were pointing. Was the crazy Su Yorong or the Emperor? And who was the one about to be destroyed? Shang Xingzhou's eyes gradually deepened in the sea of stars, and he said no more. Prince Chen Lu bid farewell. After leaving the monastery of Eternal Spring, he couldn't help but turn his head to look at that roof. He was still not sure if tonight's trip to Luoyang was correct. This morning, Su Yorong had arranged to meet him in the Orthodox Academy and said those words. They seemed extremely deliberate. She had made him feel deliberate, and this had originally been a deliberate action. But if he had never had these thoughts, how could he have been moved by this deliberate action? In these last few years, he had hidden his ambitions extremely well. No one knew of them, not even his father or acquaintances like Mou. Even the Tianhai Divine Empress had only suspected, not confirmed. Of course, this might also have been because she simply did not care. But he could not hide it from Su Yorong. Back in the imperial palace, he had felt that the girl's gaze on him was rather strange, always carrying a faint smile. She had not exposed him back then, so why was she saying this now? Why had she so deliberately given him this chance? Prince Chen Lu could not miss this chance. He also knew that if his reaction was the slightest bit inappropriate, Shang Xingzhou would regard it as a provocation, so he appeared extremely calm and frank. It now seemed that this sort of response was feasible. At the very least, Shang Xingzhou had not reacted. So what should he do next? Prince Chen Lu rushed through the night back to Jingdou. By the time he arrived at the gate of his manor on the road of peace, the morning light had already dispersed. The winter sun had arrived in the sky, and warmth had gradually arrived. It seemed that the winter was really about to pass, and it was time for everything to be renewed. Prince Chen Lu walked into the mansion with some emotion. You should know very well that the Holy Maiden wants to use us to force His Majesty to stand on the Pope's side. The Prince of Xiang stared into his eyes and asked, this being the case, why did you still go to Luoyang? Yorong has always done things fairly. Even when it comes to strategy, she is always very open and aboveboard. Prince Chen Lu had already become even calmer. Even when facing his father's incomparably cold gaze, his expression did not change. Wildfire is scary, but without this fire, we wouldn't even have the chance to take the grain out of the fire. The Prince of Xiang's eyes suddenly turned berserk, flames glimmering within them, and his voice grew even colder. But have you ever thought that only in chaos can victory be won? Does she have the ability to throw the venerable Taoist's mind into chaos? Prince Chen Lu said, I understand Yorong. Even if the venerable Taoist wins in the end, it will be a Pyrrhic victory. The Prince of Xiang was quiet for a while, then asked, then when do you think it will begin? Prince Chen Lu replied, from the moment she arranged to meet me at the Orthodox Academy, this chess game began. Her entry into the palace last night was a killing move. The Prince of Xiang arched his brows. A killing move? Prince Chen Lu replied, yes, this move is a chess game for the struggle for the world. It must be answered by the world. The Prince of Xiang sighed, so the storm has already arrived. Only after the storm can one see the rainbow. Prince Chen Lu said, when I was little, the Empress taught me that the rainbow comes from the sun, and we are the descendants of the sun. The Prince of Xiang understood what he meant. Staring into his eyes, he said, His Majesty's blood is similarly pure. Prince Chen Lu said, but in the end, he is still a cripple. The wildfire in the Prince of Xiang's eyes was gradually extinguished, but the ambition that had been hidden for many years, just like his son, was gradually emerging. He asked, when the time comes, will His Holiness the Pope agree? Prince Chen Lu replied, if Yorong loses, His Holiness the Pope will naturally not be alive. One last question. The Prince of Xiang asked, you've never said what will happen if the Holy Maiden wins. Prince Chen Lu smiled. Other than the death of one's entire family, what price can there be to be worthy of this chess game for the world? The Prince of Xiang was quiet for a very long time, and then he also began to laugh. As he laughed self-deprecatingly, the ambition in his eyes gradually dissipated and his expression became even gentler. His round face was like that of an old farmer or a wealthy man, lovable and amiable. He placed his hands on his fat belly and sighed, it seems like you and Ping will have to hurry up with your marriage. In the early morning, the Li Palace was extremely quiet. The sound of the withered tip of the bamboo broom scraping against the hard stone floor could be heard from the distance. Chen Chongqing opened his eyes, gazing at the complex and incomprehensible carvings on the ceiling of the palace, his thoughts inscrutable. He had woken up before 5 o'clock. This was an extremely rare occurrence, and it was even rarer that he did not immediately get out of bed. To many ordinary youths, lazing around in bed was one of the most beautiful pleasures in the world, but to him, this was unquestionably an extremely irresponsible waste of time and would make him feel extremely guilty. He had not gotten out of bed because this was his first day in the Li Palace. He was still rather unfamiliar with his surroundings, somewhat unaccustomed to them, and even a little fearful. He did not know where to wash his face and rinse his mouth, what sort of service he would receive, and he did not even know where the clothes he had taken off last night had been arranged. He also did not know what Su Yorong had said to his senior brother when she entered the palace last night. Only when the eaves of the palace took up most of the sky and the quiet outer hall was illuminated by the winter sun did he finally get out of bed. The first person he saw was Enhua. Those tens of thousands of believers who had used candles to petition last night had finally been persuaded to leave late in the night, but Enhua had not left. She had already waited in the hall for an entire night. Her eyes were somewhat red, perhaps from exhaustion or from crying. "It seems like this is the only way to deal with the matter of your aunt." Chen Chongqing took the Taoist robe from her hands and looked into her reddened eyes. He apologetically said, "I hope that you do not blame me." And Hua immediately replied, "How could I dare blame your majesty?" Chen Chongqing could tell that she was not lying. Confused, he asked, "Then why are you sad?" And Hua lowered her head and asked, "Your majesty, are you really intending to leave?" In the many dynasties before the Great Zhou, the Taoist faith had also been the orthodoxy, and there had been many popes in history. The pope did not have a term of office. Until the moment they returned to the Sea of Stars, they would be the divine authority of the entire orthodoxy. But of those popes in history, there were truly a few who, either because they were unwilling to be entangled by mundane matters in pursuit of the great Tao or because they were disheartened by something, ultimately ended their term of office early, choosing to hide in the mountains or go to the other side of the Sea of Stars. And Hua had studied at a young age in the 13 divisions of Radiant Green and later became an instructor, dedicating all her youth to the orthodoxy. She could even recite some of the scriptures in the Taoist scriptures backwards, so she was naturally aware of these matters. The more she thought about Chen Chongqing's words in the Great Hall of Light, the more she felt that Chen Chongqing might choose that path. She was so nervous and uneasy that she did not even believe Tang 36's comforting words. She wept several times that night. Chen Chongqing gazed at the sky parted by the eaves of the palace. He once more recalled the dark night that he had sensed on the other side of the Sea of Stars. He would bear the responsibility that he had to bear. But after doing these things, if there was a place even further away, he would naturally have to take a look. To be continued.